71 years ago, a woman in Edgewood, Alabama vanished on her way to work, disappearing without a trace, leaving her family devastated and the entire town gripped by an unspoken obsession. Authorities suspected her husband, the last person known to have seen her, was involved. But with no body found and virtually no leads to pursue, the investigation quickly reached a dead end. Yet throughout those long, drawn-out years, those who loved Evelyn never gave up hope, clinging to the faint belief that the truth was still out there waiting to be uncovered. Then one day, after a heavy rain washed away layers of forest soil that had lain undisturbed for half a century, a seemingly insignificant detail suddenly emerged, a detail everyone had overlooked, and it would change the entire case in a way no one could have anticipated. Before we dive into this shocking story, let us know where you're watching from. And if you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit subscribe. In the summer of 1955, the rural town of Edgewood in Jefferson County, Alabama, operated with the slow, characteristic pace of the South. Dirt roads running through sparsely populated neighborhoods, a few small shops around the post office, a lumber mill, and a Baptist church serving as the main hubs of community life. In that setting, 24-year-old Evelyn Carter lived a stable and orderly life. She worked as a seamstress at a shop in Birmingham, commuting daily along the same route and always adhering to fixed habits, leaving home on time, eating lunch with coworkers, visiting her parents on certain set days of the week. Evelyn was described as careful, rarely deviating from her routine, and with no history of leaving home without notice. Her husband, Samuel Carter, worked at the Edgewood post office on a fixed morning shift, usually leaving the house early to open the facility. The couple lived in a small house near the edge of town, where neighbors considered their life essentially peaceful. The evening before the incident, Evelyn was noted to have been at home, with no unusual signs in her behavior or mood, no open conflicts with anyone, and no indication of any plan to alter her schedule. Early the next morning, around 7:10, a neighbor heard the family truck's engine start and saw the vehicle leave the Carter driveway, but could not identify who was driving. Events during the day began to show irregularities. Evelyn did not arrive at work, sent no absence notification, did not answer family calls, and failed to keep her usual scheduled appointments. By the time her shift ended and she still hadn't returned home, the family tried contacting friends, co-workers, and searching her regular locations, but no one knew where she was. Checking around the house confirmed the truck was gone, and neither family nor neighbors had any information suggesting she had changed her route or left voluntarily. The prolonged lack of contact, completely contrary to Evelyn's stable habits, and the absence of the vehicle led the family to realize this was no ordinary delay. By evening, after hours of fruitless searching, the Carter family had no choice but to report the matter to local police. Upon receiving the missing person report, Edgewood police immediately dispatched 2 night shift officers to the Carter home to gather initial information. There, Samuel Carter recounted what he knew about that morning. Evelyn left the house following her usual routine. He did not see the moment she walked out the door because he was in the kitchen preparing to leave for work, and only in the late afternoon, when his wife failed to return as expected, did he call her workplace and then contact relatives to check. Family members added details about the times they had tried to reach Evelyn without success, allowing police to establish a likely window of disappearance between 7:10 and 8:80 MBU AM. This was a relatively narrow time frame, sufficient for police to begin forming initial assumptions about the victim's possible direction of travel. After completing the intake, officers conducted an immediate sweep of the area around the Carter home within about a 1-mile radius, focusing on spots likely to conceal evidence. Strips of land along fences, the narrow backyard abutting a trail, and open ground between the Carter house and an abandoned home 3 lots away. The initial sweep yielded no major discoveries but confirmed no signs of struggle or abandoned items around the house. Next, police went door to door to the nearest neighbors to ask about unusual sounds or movements that morning. Some neighbors recalled hearing an engine start around 7:10, but no one clearly saw the driver. One mentioned hearing a car door slam quite hard, though uncertain if it came from the Carter yard or a nearby road. No definitive information emerged, but these small fragments reinforced the assumption that the truck had left the house at a time consistent with the established disappearance window. From this, police temporarily ruled out the possibility that Evelyn was being held inside the house or nearby area, shifting focus to the likelihood that the victim had left in her own vehicle or had somehow been taken in that same truck. After compiling the initial facts, the lead investigator decided to plan an expanded search for the following morning. The plan had 3 parts. First, sweeping the entire route Evelyn typically took from Edgewood to Birmingham. Second, checking side turns, dirt roads, and low forested areas along the main route. Third, setting up observation points to record vehicles or witnesses who might have passed at the same time Evelyn vanished. A map of the area was spread out on the Carter dining table, routes marked with pencil, and search teams assigned by sector. In parallel, another group was tasked with returning to the neighborhood early the next morning to collect more detailed statements while neighbors were alert and recollections fresher. All preparations were carried out overnight, based on the principle that the first hours are the most critical in handling missing persons cases. With the scant facts available, Edgewood police moved into the first full day of searching with a tightly organized plan, starting from the victim's familiar route and gradually expanding along each plausible branch Evelyn or the truck might have taken. The next morning, as soon as the investigative team assembled, Edgewood police launched the first sweep of the full route Evelyn Carter traveled daily from her home in Edgewood to the sewing shop in Birmingham. Based on the established timeline from the missing person report and the victim's fixed habits, the main route was marked to include the paved section running through the center of town, connecting to a wider road leading to the highway, then passing through a series of sparse forests, stretches and low-lying land typical of northern Jefferson County, where morning traffic was not heavy and usually limited to locals. The search team was divided into 3 groups, one responsible for the main route from Edgewood to the highway, the second checking connecting side roads between dirt and paved sections that some residents occasionally used as shortcuts, and the third venturing deeper into adjacent forested areas where minor accidents had occurred in the past. The sweep began at the point closest to the Carter home to ensure no potential evidence was missed showing Evelyn might have stopped, encountered trouble, or changed direction. Officers patrolled slowly along the shoulders, observing the ground, weed patches, drainage ditches, and any spot capable of retaining tire marks or scattered items. Meanwhile, the second team systematically checked dirt roads cutting through the town's outskirts, areas with little traffic but possible choices if the victim wanted to avoid busier sections or shorten travel time. High-risk points were clearly marked on the map, including a quiet forest stretch running parallel to the main road, a small 3-way intersection near wasteland where vehicles had occasionally skidded in rainy seasons, and 2 sharp curves where uneven pavement made high-speed control difficult. At each location, the search team carefully inspected road surfaces, noted fresh tire tracks, compared compressed soil patterns to distinguish normal passing traffic from signs of sudden stopping or sharp turns. In sparse forest sections, they checked small trails leading inward, looking for unusual disturbances in grass, soil, or branches, while searching for any scraps of fabric, paper, or personal items possibly linked to the victim. However, after nearly half a day of continuous sweeping, no group found clear evidence that Evelyn had passed through or deviated from the route in an unusual way. No unfamiliar tire tracks matching Evelyn's vehicle type appeared at high-risk spots. No road segments showed skid marks from hard braking, and no items likely belonging to the victim were found on the roadway. The entire main route from Edgewood to the Birmingham turnoff remained in normal condition, with no indications of an accident, conflict, or unusual stop. This outcome led the search team to narrow the possibility of a spontaneous incident on the main road and shift toward the conclusion that her truck may have left the familiar route very early before reaching higher traffic sections or been driven off the main path in the first minutes after leaving home. The absence of the vehicle or movement traces along the usual route became critical information, forcing investigators to consider that the victim or vehicle had diverted into a less traveled area, opening a far more complex and expansive search scope than local police had initially anticipated. The lack of results from sweeping the entire main route prompted the search team to shift focus to side roads and low-lying forested areas north of Edgewood, where traffic was minimal and numerous trails led deeper inward, consistent with the hypothesis that Evelyn's truck had departed the route almost immediately after leaving home. Near midday, while the second team was expanding the search along a narrow dirt road used mainly by local livestock herders, an officer spotted the front of a vehicle protruding from thick brush along the edge of the Edgewood forest. Approaching closer, they confirmed it was Evelyn Carter's small truck, identified by its light paint color and the familiar license plate provided by the family. The area was immediately marked with stakes and boundary tape, and the on-site command unit reported back to headquarters to request additional personnel. The lead investigator ordered precise coordinate plotting of the vehicle's location using topographic maps and distance measuring tools to accurately record the position for later reconstruction of travel paths. Initial observations showed the truck parked fairly straight, front-facing the dirt road, wheels not sunk into mud or slid off the path, suggesting it had not been abandoned in a loss-of-control situation, but more likely driven there deliberately. The depth of tire impressions in the dry soil indicated the vehicle had remained stationary for many hours, with no signs of being moved or struck afterward. The truck's exterior was intact. No fresh scratches, no heavy collision marks, windows unbroken, and body undented, ruling out an on-site accident. While 2 officers stood guard to prevent scene tampering, the rest expanded the cordoned area by several dozen meters in all directions, aiming to preserve any potential ground evidence, from footprints to material fragments that could indicate the victim's or driver's direction of movement. The forest edge area was deemed complex due to leaf litter and low grass easily concealing traces, but the dry, undisturbed ground, unaffected by rain, provided good visibility conditions. A preliminary scene sketch was drawn on site, including vehicle position, distance from dirt road edge to truck body, outward-facing orientation, points of ground disturbance, and compression height of undergrowth around both doors. Forensic technicians documented each wheel's exact position to analyze depth and orientation, assessing speed and maneuvers before stopping. Additionally, tree shadows and natural lighting were recorded to help estimate arrival time based on shadow angles, as daylight could provide indirect information about the sun's position when the truck arrived. On-site notes showed no evidence of dragging or crashing into place, no extended skid marks, and no distinctive tire patterns indicating sharp turns or abrupt stops. These factors reinforced the assessment that the driver had intentionally guided the truck onto the trail, stopped under control, and departed in an undetermined direction. After expanding the cordon, the search team marked suspicious points such as ground depressions, freshly broken branches, disturbed leaf areas, and uneven compression zones. They prioritized junctions between the dirt road and forest edge, where footprints or dropped items were most likely. All observations were photographed from multiple angles for later analysis, avoiding scene disturbance as reinforcements arrived. Discovering the truck marked a pivotal turning point in the investigation, significantly narrowing the search area and creating a key physical anchor for reconstructing the victim's movements. However, in-depth examination was not yet permitted until the forensics team arrived for support, so the sole objective at this stage was to secure the area and establish survey boundaries before moving to detailed analysis inside and around the vehicle. When the forensics team arrived and took over the scene from the search unit, examination of Evelyn Carter's truck began immediately, starting with a full survey of the cabin to identify traces related to vehicle operation before it was driven onto the forest trail in Edgewood. The driver's seat was checked first. It was pulled back farther than appropriate for Evelyn's height per family-provided information, and the backrest angle also deviated from the usual setting for someone of similar build. Investigators noted this as a significant indicator that the last driver may not have been Evelyn. The steering wheel showed no unusual soiling, but the upper rim had multiple uneven light contact marks, suggesting repeated quick steering adjustments over a short distance. The gas and brake pedals displayed 2 different mud patterns, one dry and light-colored, the other darker and damper, indicating the driver's shoes had contacted at least 2 different terrains in close succession. The cabin floor near the passenger side showed a faint scratch, not clear enough to identify but recorded as possibly related to someone twisting or reaching for something while the vehicle was running. No personal items were left behind, except for some soil clumps near the door edges, consistent with travel through dry ground. After completing the interior check, investigators moved to the surrounding ground to determine the direction of anyone exiting the vehicle. Along the left side of the truck, about 1 step from the driver's door, a series of shallow footprints appeared, heading into the forest. These suggested an average-weight person walking cautiously. A few meters away on the right side, a different set of deeper, wider footprints appeared, apparently from larger shoes. The spacing between the 2 footprint groups did not align, indicating the possibility of 2 people leaving the vehicle at different times or from different directions. Initial analysis also noted the footprint's scattered pattern, with no signs of running, stumbling, or dragging, ruling out a struggle immediately beside the truck. Behind the vehicle, technicians found a long compression mark resembling something heavy, briefly placed on the ground, though not deep enough to identify. The area directly under the tailgate was closely examined for signs of opening or loading, but no scrape marks or direct soil disturbance appeared beneath the rear door. However, about 2 steps to the left, low grass was compressed in an arc shape, possibly from someone standing still or pivoting before leaving the area. Measuring the tire impressions, Investigators found all four wheels clearly imprinted in the dry soil, indicating controlled stopping rather than hard braking or sharp turning. Notably, the left front tire showed a slight rotation mark, reflecting a steering adjustment to align the truck with the trail. No long skid marks or unusual curves appeared, ruling out forced turns or loss of control. The tire tracks leading into the parking position were uniform in shape, but no exit tracks were found leaving the area, suggesting the driver left the vehicle and proceeded on foot into the forest or in an undetermined direction. At the forest edge near the driver's door, forensics noted multiple disturbances in the leaf litter at varying levels of freshness. Some points showed light shoe impressions. Others had broken branches fallen inward, consistent with at least one person moving farther into the area after the truck stopped. Mud samples were collected from positions with differing color impressions for later comparison with cabin mud. From the combination of footprints, tire marks, and vehicle condition, investigators formed an initial hypothesis. The truck was not abandoned due to an accident like skidding or breakdown, but was deliberately driven to the parking spot. The spacing between footprints and size differences suggested two or more individuals had been present around the truck near the time it stopped. Additionally, the lack of struggle or resistance signs around the vehicle led investigators to temporarily rule out a fight at the parking location. These facts shaped the next steps for the investigative team. Further clarify the timing of the vehicle's arrival here, identify who may have driven it, and analyze the direction of those who left the truck to expand the survey area using a linear method based on footprints and ground disturbances. Right after completing the survey of the vehicle and collecting basic traces around the parking area, the search team was deployed to implement a grid pattern forest sweep, a method well suited to the Edgewood forest terrain with its many spontaneous trails, thick leaf litter layer, and low-lying patches prone to retaining movement traces. The area map was expanded and divided into multiple relatively uniform rectangular cells based on contour lines, tree density, and accessibility for support personnel. Each cell was numbered and assigned to a sub-team, ensuring no area was overlooked or redundantly checked. In parallel with dividing the search grid, police reinforced personnel from the local rescue department and mobilized 2 K9 units from a neighboring county to assist in detecting scents, dropped items, or points likely to retain human odor. Before entering the cell-by-cell sweep, the on-site commander reiterated the approach rules: proceed from the outer edges inward in a zigzag pattern, noting every ground anomaly, focusing on points with compressed grass, disturbed leaves, or mud mixed into dry soil, while strictly avoiding stepping on any potential movement-related traces. The search teams began sweeping from the cells closest to the parking spot first, then gradually expanded to adjacent cells. During movement, they continuously checked the ground and leaf litter for unnatural depressions, upturned soil from concentrated weight, or elongated footprints in a specific direction. In the cell nearest the vehicle, the search team noted additional points of light compression in low grass, distributed in a curved pattern heading into the forest, aligning with the direction of the shallow footprint series previously observed near the driver's door. This reinforced the assessment that one person had proceeded deeper into the forest in that direction. As teams advanced 30 to 50 meters farther, the K9 units began reacting to an area with an unusual odor, not a body scent, but consistent with recent human presence nearby. Officers cordoned off the area and closely inspected the ground, where a small clearing appeared between two low bushes. There, they discovered a light-colored fabric handkerchief stuck with dried mud, pressed between the leaf litter and tree roots. The item was confirmed to match the family's description of a handkerchief Evelyn commonly carried, becoming the first piece of evidence recovered in the Edgewood forest and a key indicator that the victim or someone with her had passed through this area. After securing the handkerchief, investigators expanded the cordon around the vicinity to ensure no additional evidence was missed. However, within about a 20-meter radius of the handkerchief location, no other clear physical signs were found beyond a few crushed leaf spots and minor broken branches. Though insufficient to determine the next direction, these small traces suggested continuous movement rather than a stop in place. Continuing to expand the search grid, teams pushed deeper into sparser tree areas where the ground was level but easily obscured by summer leaf litter. Some faint shoe impressions were noted, less distinct than those near the vehicle due to wind and natural decomposition, yet still indicating a relatively consistent inward direction. Teams continued sweeping across the grid's width, checking every point with slight depressions or surface texture changes. Denser, harder to access wooded areas were flagged for later handling with additional tools and support. After more than an hour of continuous sweeping, Command assessed the need to extend the search radius by at least 200 to 300 meters in the direction the trace cluster was pointing, as the current area showed the person leaving the vehicle had moved with relative confidence and without unusual curves indicative of injury or disorientation. This increased the likelihood that the victim or companion had been led along a pre-planned route or had deliberately moved deeper into the forest. To maintain grid accuracy, the map was updated in real time, marking swept paths and points needing reinspection if lighting or terrain hindered visibility. Implementing the grid model in Edgewood Forest, though resource and time-intensive, provided the advantage of systematic coverage, allowing the search team to quickly rule out areas without movement signs and progressively narrow the focus zone. The handkerchief evidence served as a critical anchor in establishing the initial movement direction, compelling the search team to continue expanding spatial analysis of the forest to trace the path the victim or companion may have taken. In parallel with expanding the forest grid search in Edgewood, police launched a separate investigative branch to determine whether Evelyn Carter had any personal, work-related, or social reasons that could have led her to voluntarily leave home or alter her route on the morning of her disappearance. This investigative branch focused on gathering information from the most familiar sources: her workplace, family, friends, and individuals who regularly interacted with Evelyn in the weeks leading up to her vanishing. At the sewing shop in Birmingham, investigators reviewed work schedules and spoke with management to ascertain whether Evelyn had shown signs of anxiety, fatigue, or instability in recent days. Records showed she had worked consistently, taken no leave, had no disputes with co-workers, and made no mention of changing hours or reducing workload. According to her sewing group colleagues, Evelyn maintained stable habits, never missed work abruptly, and always gave clear notice for any unexpected matters. This reinforced the conclusion that her failure to appear at work on the day of disappearance was highly irregular. From the family side, police reviewed Evelyn's most recent visits, including her scheduled parental visits on fixed days of the week. No one in the family reported any negative changes in her mood. Her routine appeared generally consistent, with no signs of stress or internal family friction. Evelyn's financial records were also examined. Spending remained at normal levels, with no unusual transactions, large withdrawals, or sudden expenses suggesting preparation to leave home. Recent shopping receipts were all for everyday household items, showing no signs of packing for a long trip. Bank records indicated no new loans, no missed regular payments, and no requests for financial help from relatives or friends. Investigators also reviewed personal appointments. Evelyn's last scheduled plan was the parental visit on the day she vanished, a fixed habit she had never skipped without reason. When questioned, close friends provided consistent information that Evelyn faced no social troubles, had no conflicts within her circle, and expressed no desire to leave town, quit her job, or change her living environment. Close friends confirmed no unusual behavior in recent times, no mentions of personal safety concerns, and no signs of marital or other social relationship conflicts. Police also checked medical appointments, service transactions, and landline phone records for unusual contacts, but found nothing indicating intent to leave home or meet someone off her usual route. Additionally, there was no evidence Evelyn had sought travel information, booked transportation, or contacted off-hours work. Compiling all data from various sources, police concluded the victim had no personal motive or social context suggesting voluntary departure, no reason to alter her travel route, and no conflict severe enough to cause her to avoid family or workplace. All gathered information portrayed Evelyn as living a stable life with healthy relationships and consistently maintained personal habits. Her disappearance on an ordinary morning did not fit any pattern of voluntary departure, further strengthening the assessment that her vanishing involved anomalous factors not stemming from personal desire. Once data from Evelyn's family, friends, and workplace had been fully documented, police refocused on the most critical source of information regarding the final hours before the victim's disappearance: the statement of Samuel Carter, the person with the closest contact to Evelyn the evening before and morning of her vanishing. The first interview with Sam was conducted at the Carter home to preserve his psychological state and avoid unnecessary pressure. In the discussion, Sam described the previous evening as relatively calm. They had a simple dinner. Evelyn washed some kitchen items, then read in the living room before bed. He asserted there was no tense conversation, no argument, and no sign of distress from his wife. According to Sam, Evelyn went to bed about 15 minutes earlier than usual, though investigators noted he could not recall exactly when she turned off the bedroom light, only estimating around close to 10 o'clock. When shifting to the morning description, Sam said he woke to the alarm at 6:02 to prepare for his post office shift. He stated Evelyn was still asleep when he got out of bed, and he saw her only once around 6:30 while passing the kitchen where Evelyn was preparing some food to take along. Sam said their final morning exchange concerned only simple matters like confirming work schedules and his departure time, with no mention of changing routes or her leaving earlier or later than usual. However, when investigators asked Sam to precisely describe when he heard or saw the truck leave the driveway, his answer became inconsistent. Initially, he said he did not hear the engine because he was in the bathroom, but later said he might have heard the engine but wasn't sure what time. This created a mismatch between Sam's departure time and the truck's departure time, especially when cross-referenced with the neighbor's statement confirming the engine sound around 7:10. When further questioned about the period from his leaving for work until realizing Evelyn had not arrived at work and was not answering calls, Sam described a rather disjointed sequence. He recalled leaving home around 7:20, but could not confirm for sure because he didn't look at the clock. This conflicted with neighborhood data indicating the truck left before Sam's stated time, prompting investigators to question whether Sam was truly inside the house when the truck moved. To clarify, investigators asked Sam to recount his morning schedule at the post office. He said he opened at 8 housed, as usual, but could not provide the name of the first customer or the exact time he began work. When asked if anyone saw him that morning, Sam mentioned only a few regular customers, but could not recall names or provide clear descriptions. These lack of detail elements led police to note that Sam's initial statement lacked sufficient to establish his actions during the critical 7:08 window. Investigators continued cross-checking Sam's provided timelines against collected neighborhood facts and found several points did not align or showed significant deviation. For example, Sam said Evelyn showed no unusual behavior the previous evening, but a neighbor recalled the living room light stayed on later than usual, something Sam did not mention. However, as this was only a minor discrepancy, investigators merely recorded it without deeming it a major contradiction. More notably, Sam could not accurately describe what Evelyn carried that morning. While family confirmed she typically carried a fixed fabric purse, Sam said she might have carried it, but did not recall where the purse was placed the previous evening, adding to the vagueness of his account. Investigators also inquired about Evelyn's mental health, work, and social relationships. Sam mentioned she had been slightly stressed from work in recent weeks, but this contradicted statements from the sewing shop indicating no significant pressure on Evelyn. Sam's unconfirmed detail led police to note he might be attempting to add context to explain the disappearance as voluntary, despite no supporting real data. Summarizing the entire initial interview with Sam, investigators observed that while he cooperated and showed no direct evasion, his account contained many time gaps and high vagueness on small but pivotal details. The slight deviations regarding timing and Evelyn's morning behavior were clearly documented and flagged for reinterrogation in later stages, especially as the team worked to reconstruct the victim's full movements before disappearance. In parallel with reviewing Sam's statement, police expanded verification of the timing and circumstances of Evelyn's truck appearing in the Edgewood forest by collecting statements from residents living around the forest area and along the dirt road leading to the discovery site. This group of potential witnesses was most likely to have observed or heard unusual movements between 7:00 and 8:00 in Raburn. The time frame established is particularly critical to the entire case. Progression. Among those interviewed, one witness living in a wooden house about 200 meters from the trail stated he began working in his yard from 6:45 and stayed until nearly 1800 Nani. He recalled that around 7:30, he heard a truck engine moving slowly along the dirt road. Given the area's quiet morning conditions, the sound stood out, and the witness confirmed it matched the distinctive sound of a small truck consistent with Evelyn's vehicle description. Another witness, living near the turnoff to the trail, said she heard a loud car door slam that morning, a little before 8, but could not see anyone exit due to low tree obstruction. She described the sound as a deliberate door closing, not wind or falling objects, occurring as a single event without follow-up sounds, like conversation or footsteps near her house. Cross-referencing these two statements, investigators noted the timelines aligned fairly well. The vehicle moved into the area around 7:30 and likely stopped shortly after, before the door was closed. Another resident on the forest's eastern edge reported hearing an odd sound that same morning, though vaguely described. He thought it might have been breaking branches or footsteps on leaf litter, occurring minutes after a distant engine sound he faintly heard. Though unconfirmed as related to Evelyn's truck, investigators noted it fell within the time frame needing verification. Gathering statements from multiple sources helped police establish a fairly clear time frame for the truck's appearance at the discovery site, approximately 7:30 to 7:30 a.m. Comparing this to the neighbor near the Carter home, hearing the truck leave the driveway at 7:10:26 calculated a reasonable travel time for the vehicle from home to the Edgewood forest, reinforcing the assumption that the truck was driven directly from the house to the parking spot in one continuous movement, with no stops along the main road. This aligned with the search team's failure to find vehicle traces on Evelyn's familiar commute route. After confirming the truck's arrival time frame, police shifted to analyzing possibilities related to exiting the vehicle. Based on footprint characteristics around the truck, including at least two distinct sizes, investigators formed preliminary assumptions. First, one person drove and exited toward the forest. Second, the possibility of an additional individual present, though unclear if they exited before or after. Third, the driver may not have moved alone, but followed a calculated route. These assumptions did not identify individuals but helped narrow investigative directions by eliminating scenarios like sudden abandonment due to breakdown or panicked fleeing, since the scene showed no signs of haste, struggle, or abrupt stopping. Instead, both the parking position and witness statements indicated a stable, purposeful vehicle operation. Combining resident statements, unusual audio reports, and on-site observations, police concluded the truck was almost certainly brought into the forest around 7:30 and subsequently left under full control. The timing and manner of stopping aligned with the footprint direction leading into the forest discovered by the search team, indicating a clear sequence of actions without characteristics of a random incident. The pieces from witness statements became a vital link in determining the initial post-abandonment movement and provided the foundation for reconstructing the victim's journey on the morning she disappeared. While the search team continued sweeping the Edgewood forest area based on the collected traces and witness statements, another group of investigators returned to the Carter home to conduct a more thorough examination of Evelyn's personal belongings in search of information that might explain her movements in the weeks leading up to her disappearance. During this process, they discovered an unusual envelope tucked in the nightstand drawer of Evelyn's bedroom, wedged between household bills and personal notes. The envelope bore no postmark, no sender's name. The paper had slightly yellowed but showed no tears or damage, indicating it had been deliberately stored for a relatively short period. Upon opening the envelope, police found a single type sheet containing threatening content, neatly formatted with no accompanying handwritten notes. The discovery of this document marked a turning point in the investigation, as it was the first piece of evidence suggesting the victim may have been approached or pressured by an unidentified individual. The investigative team seized the envelope and threatening document following proper evidence protocol, photographing it and placed in the drawer, recording its exact position relative to surrounding items, sealing the envelope in a specialized evidence bag, and logging the chain of custody. The evidence was then transferred to the sorting table for preliminary assessment before being set for in-depth forensic examination. Investigators noted that the document was produced on a typewriter rather than handwritten, and the typeface matched models common in the 1940s to 1950s at small offices and middle-class households. Characteristics such as wear on certain characters, slight misalignment of lines, and uneven ink density were fully documented for later analysis. Close inspection of the paper surface revealed no signs of folding or crumpling, suggesting whoever stored it had placed it flat in the drawer, and Evelyn may have read it before putting it away. No visible fingerprints were apparent to the naked eye, but technicians still collected samples for analysis using methods appropriate to the era's equipment. The fact that the threatening document was found in the victim's private bedroom indicated Evelyn may have had contact with the sender relatively close to the date of her disappearance. Accordingly, the investigative team began compiling a list of individuals who could have had access to Evelyn in her daily life, including coworkers at the sewing shop, regular customers, neighbors who frequently interacted with her, close friends, and extended family members. They also noted individuals with professional ties to the Carter household, such as delivery personnel or repairmen who had visited in the preceding months. The purpose of this list was to identify the range of potential subjects with sufficient proximity or opportunity to deliver a threatening letter without drawing attention. Beyond direct contacts, investigators also considered individuals from Evelyn's past, such as former friends or acquaintances from her school days. Cross-referencing this data with family statements, police noted that Evelyn had not mentioned being threatened or harassed in recent weeks, raising the question of whether she had deliberately concealed the matter or read the letter but did not consider it a serious threat. However, the absence of a postmark suggested the sender may not have mailed it, but instead handed it directly to her or placed it where she would easily find it. Based on this, investigators categorized subjects by level of access: those who could encounter Evelyn daily, those who met less frequently but had reason to be near the Carter home, and those with no recent close contact but prior acquaintance with the victim. In the initial analysis, investigators re-reviewed portions of Sam's statements that might relate to Evelyn receiving mail, but found no clear information linking the two. Nevertheless, they noted the family atmosphere appeared free of overt conflict, and Evelyn was described as cautious and not prone to creating discord with others. All these elements made it difficult for police to pinpoint an initial motive for the threatening document, but sufficient to hypothesize that the victim may have been quietly stalked or pressured by someone. Although it was not yet known whether this document was directly related to the disappearance, its emergence compelled investigators to open a new analytical direction, identifying the sender and assessing whether the threatening behavior was an early sign of a greater danger. With the evidence secured and cataloged, and a list of potential subjects formed, a critical data framework was established to support subsequent investigative steps in tracing the cause and sequence of events leading to Evelyn Carter's disappearance on an otherwise unremarkable morning with no apparent warning signs. After discovering the anonymous envelope in Evelyn's bedroom and compiling the list of individuals who could have accessed her in the period close to her disappearance, police prioritized verifying subjects with prior personal connections to the victim, most notably Thomas Raburn, who had been in a romantic relationship with Evelyn several years before her marriage to Samuel Carter. According to family-provided information, the relationship between Evelyn and Thomas had ended amicably, but given his past emotional attachment and potential knowledge of Evelyn's habits, investigators decided to conduct a direct interview with him to rule in or out his involvement. The contact with Thomas was carried out at his private residence in Birmingham in the form of a low-pressure interview, to avoid creating unnecessary stress at a stage where suspicion level was undetermined. Police began by asking Thomas to recount the history of his relationship with Evelyn. They had met in high school, dated for several years, and parted ways when Evelyn shifted her focus to her job at the sewing shop. According to Thomas, the breakup stemmed from differing life goals rather than conflict or arguments. He also asserted that after the split, they had maintained no regular contact and only encountered each other rarely at community events. When asked about the last time he saw Evelyn, Thomas said it was a town event about 2 years earlier, where they exchanged only polite greetings without deeper conversation. Investigators noted Thomas's calm and cooperative demeanor during this portion, but continued probing for details on any prior events that might suggest negative motive, such as arguments, jealousy, or personal resentment. Thomas categorically denied any such issues, stating the relationship had ended at the right time was no remaining reason to interfere in each other's lives. After verifying the relationship history, police shifted to a more technical objective, collecting handwriting and typing samples from Thomas for comparison with the threatening document found in Evelyn's room. He was asked to handwrite 2 sample paragraphs and type several lines on the typewriter at his home for forensic comparison. The sample collection followed proper procedure, ensuring Thomas was not informed of the specific purpose to avoid influencing his writing or typing manner. After obtaining the initial samples, investigators asked whether Thomas owned a Royal Quiet Deluxe typewriter, the model common in the area and consistent with suspected characteristics of the threatening document. But Thomas stated he did not own that model and that the typewriter he used had been purchased recently. This information was recorded for later cross-reference with forensic findings. In the subsequent phase, police focused on analyzing potential motives Thomas might have had if connected to the disappearance. Possibilities considered included resurfacing old emotions, unresolved conflicts, jealousy, or issues tied to Evelyn's new life. However, data from the victim's family and friends indicated Thomas had had no significant involvement in Evelyn's life for many years and showed no signs of attempting to reconnect or influence her. A background check of Thomas's conduct in Birmingham revealed no history of violence, legal disputes, or other instability. Coworkers at his workplace confirmed his full presence on the day of Evelyn's disappearance, and that he did not leave his post during the time frame matching the presumed disappearance window. Additionally, he had multiple witnesses confirming contact with him during that morning shift, providing a relatively clear picture of Thomas's morning movements. To further assess motive, investigators asked about Thomas's reaction upon learning of Evelyn's disappearance. He expressed surprise and concern, but displayed no behavior suggesting concealment or unusual tension. His consistent cooperation throughout the session, ability to provide coherent information, and composure when asked to provide handwriting and typing samples made it difficult for police to center suspicion on him. At the conclusion of the session, investigators summarized that although Thomas belonged to the group with prior personal ties to Evelyn and required thorough checking to rule out involvement, the gathered data showed no clear indication of criminal motive. His confirmed presence at work throughout the relevant time frame, combined with alignment between his account and multiple other witnesses, provided a strong basis to temporarily remove him from the list of subjects capable of directly causing the disappearance. Nevertheless, the handwriting and typing samples were retained for comparison with the evidence to complete the investigative process. Immediately after the session with Thomas Raburn and the collection of necessary comparison samples, the investigative team moved to alibi verification, aiming to confirm the accuracy of Thomas's statements and determine whether he was continuously present at his workplace during the time frame overlapping Evelyn Carter's presumed disappearance. To begin, police visited the steel mill where Thomas worked, requesting payroll records and shift logs for the day of the incident. Records showed Thomas clocked in before 7:00 a.m., consistent with his regular shift, with no notations indicating he left his post or took unscheduled leave that morning. The mill's basic punch card time system, though not as advanced as later ones, was sufficient to verify clock-in times and entry-exit activities. To ensure certainty, police further requested permission to review the manual shift supervisor's log, maintained daily per internal policy. The log showed the supervisor had signed off confirming Thomas's entire crew was present for the 7th hour at 5 a.m. Shift handover meeting only 5 minutes before the neighbor near the Carter home heard Evelyn's truck leave the driveway. This immediately created a clear incompatibility. The geographic distance between Edgewood and the Birmingham steel mill would not allow Thomas to be at work at that time if he had been involved in driving Evelyn's truck into the forest around 7:30. To reinforce this, investigators conducted quick interviews with direct shift co-workers. Several confirmed seeing Thomas in the production area from the start of the shift as they prepared machinery for the morning's work. One co-worker distinctly recalled Thomas discussing a new order with him around 7:15 to 7/2020, coinciding with the time frame when Evelyn's truck was believed to be leaving home or traveling on the dirt road. This alignment further strengthened the conclusion that Thomas could not have been simultaneously at the mill and in the Edgewood area. Additionally, to completely rule out the possibility of Thomas briefly leaving the mill unnoticed, police examined the sole road connecting the steel mill to the Edgewood forest. Based on early morning traffic conditions of the era, travel between the two locations took a minimum of 40 to 45 minutes non-stop, with no shortcuts significantly reducing the time. This rendered any hypothesis that Thomas could have left the mill, carried out actions related to the disappearance, and returned within the stated window implausible in terms of timing. Next, investigators requested internal work handover logs, which recorded when each crew began and ended shifts. The log for the day in question confirmed Thomas signed in at 6:55 a.m., just before the shift meeting. With no indication he left his post until the mid-shift break. The shift log even noted a minor incident with a steel rolling machine around 8:10 a.m., with Thomas listed among the crew handling the situation. This proved he remained at the workplace well beyond the critical time frame, eliminating the possibility of secret departure during the period in question. To further bolster reliability, police reviewed the mill's material transport and warehouse issuance logs, managed by administration and filed by date. On the day of the disappearance, issuance slips bearing Thomas's signature appeared at 7:40 a.m. and 8:25 a.m., confirming he performed 2 consecutive tasks on schedule. This carried high evidentiary value due to its multi-step oversight process, making forgery or misrecording unlikely. Compiling all data from payroll records, shift supervision logs, coworker statements, and administrative documents, the investigative group determined Thomas was continuously present at his workplace throughout the entire time frame of the disappearance, with no temporal gaps allowing him to leave for the Edgewood forest or any other relevant location. Thus, not only was Thomas's alibi solidly corroborated, but the possibility of his direct involvement in driving Evelyn's truck into the forest or participating in any action leading to her disappearance was entirely ruled out. This conclusion aligned consistently with prior session observations and enabled investigators to narrow the suspect list while shifting focus to subjects with more feasible access to the victim or her vehicle in closer proximity and higher probability. After completely ruling out Thomas Raburn based on a solid alibi and no remaining grounds linking him to the threatening document, the investigative team shifted focus to forensic examination of the typewriter used to produce the anonymous letter found in Evelyn's room. The document, with its distinctive technical characteristics regarding key wear, line misalignment, and character style, became the most significant lead for narrowing the suspect pool in the absence of other direct evidence pointing to the sender. The technical team began by analyzing each character on the document. Certain keys such as R, A, and E showed uneven wear, with the left edge fainter than the right. The T printed slightly tilted to the right. Punctuation marks like periods appeared slightly lower relative to the text line. These features indicated a typewriter that was not new but maintained in relatively good condition, affected only by natural wear over time. Additionally, technicians noted the typeface matched the Royal Quiet Deluxe model, a line popular in Alabama from the late 1940s to mid-1950s. This was a crucial detail, as it narrowed the scope to a limited production run of typewriters with clear identifiable characteristics. To advance further, police compiled a comprehensive list of all households, small offices, schools, and businesses in Edgewood that had owned or currently used a Royal Quiet Deluxe typewriter. They started with sales records from the town's sole office supply store, which documented 5 Royal Quiet Deluxe units sold within the past 7 years. 3 were purchased by households, 1 by a doctor's office, and 1 for the local Baptist church secretary. Beyond directly sold machines, police canvassed residents for additional older units kept in families or passed down through generations, identifying 4 more Royal Quiet Deluxe machines still functional or in usable condition. In total, the town had 9 typewriters of the same model used to create the threatening document. After identifying the machines, investigators began collecting typing samples from each for comparison. They provided a sample paragraph and requested owners to retype it on their machine under conditions similar to when the letter was produced. Examiners focused on key characteristics, degree of key wear, line alignment, ink density, and character strike depth. During testing, 6 machines were quickly eliminated as they failed to reproduce the distinctive character flaws of the original document, either due to overly new keys or mismatched character spacing. The remaining 3 produced closer matches, with 2 showing similar wear but lacking the characteristic rightward tilt on the T. Only 1 machine replicated nearly all features: the offset faintness of the A, lowered punctuation relative to text, and a light impression from a worn corner key. This machine belonged to the Edgewood post office, where Samuel Carter worked. The discovery was immediately recorded as a major advance, but investigators exercised caution against hasty conclusions. The post office was a public facility where multiple people could access the typewriter at certain hours, particularly secretaries, administrative staff, or temporary employees. Therefore, rather than viewing Samuel as a direct suspect, they compiled a list of everyone who could have accessed the typewriter in the approximately 3 months before the threatening document was placed in Evelyn's room. The list included 5 full-time postal employees, 2 part-time workers, 1 recently employed seasonal mail carrier, and 3 individuals who had used the machine to type personal letters under the post office's community assistance policy at the time. Each person in this group was evaluated based on access level, machine usage habits, presence at the post office, and potential connection to Evelyn. Although most had no direct link to the victim, investigators did not rule out anyone until each case was verified. The analysis of the Royal Quiet Deluxe typewriter not only narrowed the suspect pool to a small group with access to this specific machine, but also opened an investigative avenue tied to Samuel Carter's workplace, the only location possessing a machine that fully matched the anonymous letter. However, this information represented only one link in the chain of evidence and required cross-referencing with other proof before drawing conclusions about any individual's role in Evelyn Carter's disappearance. After the typewriter examination revealed that the anonymous letter was produced on the Royal Quiet Deluxe at the Edgewood post office, where Samuel Carter worked, the investigative team decided to conduct a second interview with Sam to cross-reference his previous timeline with the new evidence, particularly the time Evelyn's truck left the house, the time the truck appeared in the forest, and the period during which Sam could not prove his whereabouts. The session was held at the police station to ensure a controlled environment, allowing assessment of Sam's reactions to the reinforced timelines from witnesses and physical evidence. Investigators began by asking Sam to precisely recount the sequence of events that morning before he left for work. In his prior statement, Sam said he left home around 7:20, but this conflicted with the neighbor's report of hearing the truck leave the driveway at 7:10 and was consistent with evidence showing the truck reached the Schoening Forest around 7:30 to 7:40. When pressed to pinpoint exactly when he left home, Sam this time said he might have left a little earlier, around 7:10 or 7:15, but could not recall clearly. This immediately raised the level of suspicion, because if Sam left before 7:15, he would have arrived at the post office quite early, something no coworker confirmed. Conversely, if he left after 7:20 as initially stated, his claim of not hearing the truck depart at 7:20 became difficult to explain. The shifting timeline in response to questions suggested Sam either did not have a firm grasp of the times or was attempting to adjust his account to fit newly presented facts he had not fully anticipated. Investigators continued cross-referencing Sam's statements with field evidence. Traces of Edgewood Forest indicated the truck was driven under control, with no signs of panic or loss of control. Meanwhile, witnesses near the forest confirmed the vehicle entered the trail around 7:30, 7:40, meaning the driver was present in that area during the time Sam claimed he was preparing to head to the post office. When asked if he could prove exactly when he arrived at work, Sam appeared flustered and said he guessed he arrived around 800, since that was the post office's opening time. However, internal records confirmed the post office opened at 18:30 daily, but there was no evidence showing Sam was present on time that day. Only an informal activity log from another employee noted that Sam arrived later than usual, without specifying an exact time. Additionally, postal slips showed no signature or notation from Sam before 8:15, meaning he had no verifiable proof of presence at the workplace during the 7:08:15 window, the most critical period of the disappearance. When questioned about his activities during that interval, Sam said he might have walked part of the way or might have taken a roundabout route to the post office, but provided no clear timeline. These inconsistent responses were documented by investigators as signs of an attempt to create a plausible gap in the timeline rather than recounting actual events. Next, the investigative team shifted to the typewriter topic. Without disclosing the forensic results, they asked Sam who had access to the Royal Quiet Deluxe at the post office. Sam asserted that any employee could use it, but when asked whether he frequently typed personal documents on a machine, Sam answered vaguely that he rarely used it, since his job mainly involved handling transactions rather than drafting paperwork. However, this raised questions because coworkers stated Sam regularly used the typewriter for internal correspondence and inventory reports, prompting inquiries about why he downplayed his usage. Investigators then asked Sam if he was aware that Evelyn had received an anonymous letter. Sam denied knowing anything about it, but the delay in his response was noted by investigators as a factor for later cross-checking. The interview continued focusing on whether Sam had used the post office typewriter in the 2 weeks before Evelyn's disappearance. He replied that he might have used it a few times, but could not recall specific dates. This created a notable coincidence with indications that the threatening letter was typed on the machine in a state of keyware consistent with recent use. After completing the timeline cross-referencing portion, investigators summarized the periods Sam could not account for, from 7 to at least 8:10 a.m. This time frame perfectly overlapped with the truck's entire journey, leaving the house at 7:10, traveling via side roads, appearing in the forest around 7:30, and being abandoned before 7:40 to 7:45. Sam's lack of a clear alibi, combined with inconsistencies in his statements and access to the typewriter matching the evidence, officially marked him as a potential suspect, though insufficient grounds existed for a final conclusion. Investigators noted that Sam remained formally cooperative but showed a tendency to adjust time markers to fit questions, a pattern often seen in individuals attempting to maintain the role of information provider rather than directly involved party. Designating Sam as a potential suspect represented a major shift in investigative direction, requiring police to continue meticulously reviewing evidence related to movement patterns, vehicle access, and subtle but noteworthy signs that had emerged from the earliest stages of the Evelyn Carter disappearance investigation. After identifying Samuel Carter as a potential suspect based on an inconsistent timeline and typewriter access matching the threatening document, The investigative team expanded analysis to anonymous phone calls previously mentioned by Evelyn's relatives in the days leading up to her disappearance. Although 1955 lacked recording systems or electronic call logs, the local exchange maintained a call registry per regulations to monitor long-distance traffic and route requests. Accessing this log could provide additional data on the origin of unusual calls, helping narrow the suspect pool. Police visited the Edgewood exchange, staffed by only 3 operators on shifts, and requested permission to review the log pages from the 3 weeks before Evelyn vanished. The exchange registry from that era included entries for call time, requesting line number, connection type, and notes if line issues occurred. Among hundreds of entries, investigators focused on calls originating near the Carter home, and especially those from numbers linked to the Edgewood post office, where Sam worked. After filtering, several noteworthy points emerged. Within the 10 days before Evelyn disappeared, 3 anonymous calls requested connection to the Carter residence but went unanswered. All occurred late in the evening and were noted by operators. No voice identification, caller did not give name. This deviated from small-town custom, where callers typically identified themselves before requesting a connection. More significantly, connection records showed all 3 calls originated from the public payphone in the post office transaction area. This carried substantial weight, especially when cross-referenced with the post office typewriter, fully matching the threatening document. Investigators further checked the timing of the 3 calls. 2 took place around 6:45 and 7:10 p.m., coinciding with times Sam often stayed late after hours to finish tasks, per coworker statements. The third occurred around 12:20 p.m., a time when the post office had only 2 on-duty staff who confirmed Sam's presence in the building that day. After establishing the frequency and time frame of the unusual calls, the team examined other numbers that had called the Carter home near the time of the disappearance. All were familiar family or friend numbers, except for the 3 noted above. This clearly indicated someone had deliberately contacted the Carter residence from the post office public phone without leaving an identity or engaging in direct conversation. Next, police compiled a list of individuals authorized to use the post office public phone at that time, including all full-time staff, part-time workers, and some residents who occasionally asked operators to place calls. However, an operator provided a key additional detail. The logged calls were made without operator assistance, meaning the caller was proficient with the equipment and dialed directly, a method most residents were unfamiliar with, as the Edgewood exchange operated on a manual connection system at the time. Among those capable of self-dialing, only 5 individuals qualified: 3 long-term postal employees, 1 mail carrier, and Sam. When investigators pressed the operator about voice or background sounds heard during the 3 calls, she recalled that the caller never spoke beyond stating the desired connection time and remained silent throughout. This reinforced the hypothesis that the caller intentionally avoided revealing their voice. Cross-referencing the access list with call timings, investigators noted that the 3 long-term employees had left the post office before 6:30 p.m., per fixed schedules, making it difficult for them to make the 2 evening calls. The mail carrier worked mornings and was not present after 5:07 p.m. Thus, only Sam remained at the post office during the windows matching the 6:45 and 7:10 p.m. calls, and was also present in the building during the 12:20 p.m. call. Compiling data from the call registry, call timing, individuals capable of self-dialing, and unrestricted access to the post office phone, the suspect pool narrowed from many individuals to a very small group, with Sam standing out as the only one meeting all conditions: presence at the location, ability to operate the equipment, unaccounted time gaps, and a yet unclarified potential motive. The call data retrieval results became a vital additional link in the chain of suspicion, creating a consistent picture among physical evidence, behavior, and access to communication tools within a specific group, in which Samuel Carter emerged as the most prominent subject requiring deeper investigation. After completing call data retrieval from the exchange and narrowing the suspect pool to a very small group, the investigative team moved to the next critical analysis step: evaluating each suspect's mobility on the morning of Evelyn Carter's disappearance. The objective was to determine which individuals with potential access to the vehicle, communication devices, or victim had sufficient time and conditions to travel between key locations: the Carter home, the dirt road leading to Edgewood Forest, the vehicle discovery site, and the suspect's workplace or residence. First, the team created a detailed map based on 1955 road conditions, using Jefferson County topographic maps, main routes, side roads, dirt paths, and trails provided by local residents. 3 primary routes were marked: from the Carter home to Edgewood Forest, from the forest to the post office, and from the post office back to town center, considered plausible paths for any suspect. The distance from the Carter home to the forest trail entrance was about 4 miles, equivalent to 10 to 12 minutes by truck without obstruction. From the vehicle discovery site to the Edgewood post office was roughly 2.5 miles, taking about 7 to 8 minutes if the driver left the truck and walked to the dirt road to retrieve another vehicle or return to town via the main road. These data were used to simulate movement within the 7:08:15 a.m. window, the most critical period of the case. For each suspect, investigators constructed a theoretical movement framework, a model based on last sighting time, appearance at work or residence, and possible departure or return times. When cross-referenced with witness-provided timelines, the analysis team quickly eliminated most suspects. The first shift postal employee, often mentioned in connection with typewriter access, was reported present at work from 6:45 and continuously observed until 9:07 a.m., coinciding with peak mail processing hours. This completely ruled out his leaving the post office, driving to the Carter home, accessing the vehicle, and taking it into the forest within less than an hour. The morning mail carrier was also swiftly eliminated, as he appeared on his first delivery route at 7:30 per confirmation from 2 households and could not simultaneously travel back to Edgewood to carry out actions involving driving Evelyn's truck. For the 2 part-time employees previously noted using the post office typewriter, investigators checked their residences and work hours on the day in question. One lived too far, about 7 miles south of town, and was confirmed to have left home around 700 per his mother's statement. The other arrived at the post office near 8:30, far later than the vehicle's discovery time in the forest. Similarly, the 2 residents who had used the post office typewriter for personal letters had no motive related to Evelyn and no opportunity for morning movement, as they worked at the steel mill on the 7:15 shift. Investigators also mapped Thomas Raburn's mobility, the subject examined early on. However, as previously verified, Thomas began his shift at 7:05 and remained continuously at the Birmingham steel mill until police arrived for investigation, making his presence in Edgewood that morning impossible. When all other suspects' movement routes were constructed and compared to actual timelines, investigators found that only one person fit the entire journey: Samuel Carter. According to Sam's statement, he left home around 7:20, but investigators had already determined this time frame unreliable. No one saw Sam between 7:00 and 8:00. No witness confirmed his appearance at the post office before 8:15. And internal post office logs showed no signatures or transactions by Sam during that period. When placing Sam into the actual movement model, results showed if Sam left home at 7:10 at 10, the time the neighbor heard Evelyn's truck depart, he had ample time to drive into Edgewood Forest by 7:30, leave the vehicle before 7:40, and return to the post office before 8:10 without drawing attention. The interval between 7:40 and 8:10 precisely matched the gap in Sam's account that he could not reasonably explain. Additionally, the route from the forest to the post office was short enough for someone intent on concealing movements to travel unnoticed, especially in the morning when the town remained sparsely populated. Applying the distance-time analysis to all remaining suspects, investigators concluded no one besides Sam had the geographic position, free time, and vehicle access aligning with the truck's full journey. This not only reinforced Sam's placement among key suspects, but also highlighted the inconsistencies in his statements already documented from prior interviews. The final conclusion of the mobility analysis was, only Samuel Carter had the capability to move between all critical points of the case within the established time frame. Only he had an uncontrolled time gap, and only he had access to both the victim's vehicle and the typewriter matching the threatening document. This was a consistent outcome across behavioral analysis, field data, and movement, modeling a major advance in tightening the suspect pool in the Evelyn Carter disappearance case. After completing the mobility analysis of each suspect and determining that only Samuel Carter had sufficient time and route conditions to carry out the journey related to the disappearance, the investigative team expanded the search scope to rule out the possibility that Evelyn's body had been dumped in the river, a hypothesis requiring consideration despite no direct evidence. The Black Warrior River lay not far from Edgewood, serving as the area's main waterway and frequented by locals for fishing or small-scale transport. The wide river featured deep sections and tributaries leading into wetlands, making disposal of evidence feasible for a suspect intent on eliminating traces. Therefore, the search team decided to launch a sweep operation there, not because evidence indicated the body was taken to the river, but because ruling out this direction would help focus the investigation on more plausible scenarios. The search team divided into two groups, one sweeping the eastern bank, where numerous trails ran down to the water's edge, the other covering the western side, with more complex terrain featuring dense brush and minor erosion sections. Additionally, motorboats were deployed to check deeper water segments, particularly slow-flow areas prone to accumulating objects. The river sweep was supported by grappling hooks, dragnets, and manual probing tools, standard equipment for rescue units of the era. During the sweep, the team noted several floating or shoreline-trapped objects, but none related to the disappearance, mostly branches, driftwood, trash, and discarded household items. No clothing, fabric, paper, or personal items possibly linked to Evelyn were found. At more suspicious points, such as eddies, where currents often retained heavy objects, divers inspected closely but detected no signs of a body or evidence. Based on field experience, investigators concluded that if a body had been thrown into the river at the time of the incident, the likelihood of it becoming lodged somewhere was not high due to strong morning and midday currents. But even if carried farther downstream, lighter items like clothing would likely wash ashore. However, after 3 continuous days of searching, no evidence emerged. This led to the assessment that the Black Warrior River direction did not fit disposal behavior in this case. No tire tracks, footprints, or signs of dragging heavy objects into the water appeared, elements commonly present in river disposals. On-site investigators noted that the Edgewood forest terrain was more conducive to concealing a body than transporting one to the river, which would require greater effort and carry higher risk of being seen. After ruling out the river as a primary possibility, the team returned to analyzing all traces from the forest scene and the abandoned vehicle. Investigators concluded that if the suspect intended to hide the body, the most logical location would be within the forest or nearby wasteland areas with low traffic and numerous suitable spots for burial or covering with vegetation. Geographic reality also indicated that removing a body from the forest and transporting it to the river would generate more traces, particularly drag marks or disturbances, which were entirely absent at the scene. The absence of any evidence or anomalies around the Black Warrior River led investigators to eliminate the water disposal direction and shift assessment toward the likelihood that the body was hidden or buried elsewhere, most probably in the forest area where the vehicle was abandoned. By ruling out one significant but mismatched investigative avenue, the team focused more intently on terrestrial areas and scenarios reflecting organized suspect behavior rather than hasty body dumping. Completing the Black Warrior River search, though yielding no evidence, played a necessary role in narrowing possibilities and shaping the manner in which the suspect may have handled a body if connected to Evelyn Carter's disappearance. After completing the sweep of the Black Warrior River and ruling out the possibility that the body had been dumped in the water, the investigative team returned to compiling all the data gathered in the early stages. The truck abandoned in the Edgewood forest, footprints and tire marks indicating the presence of one or more individuals, Evelyn's handkerchief found in the nearby area, the anonymous typed letter, and the inconsistent timelines in Samuel Carter's statements. However, although these pieces formed a directional picture, they did not constitute a sufficiently strong chain of direct evidence to identify a perpetrator or support formal charges. Most critically, Evelyn's body had still not been found, despite the search teams expanding the radius to many surrounding areas. Without a body, without signs of injury, and without evidence confirming violent acts, police could not conclude that a crime had occurred. Under the regulations of that era, a missing persons case could only be treated as a criminal matter when evidence showed the victim had been harmed, and in this instance, all facts remained at the level of suspicion without confirmation. The footprints, while showing multiple people present, could not prove criminal activity. The abandoned truck could result from various causes, from voluntary departure to being lured away, and the threatening letter, though increasing suspicion, did not prove motive or specific actions by any individual. When assessing prosecutability, investigators determined that no evidence met the legal standard to charge Samuel Carter or any other subject. Sam had suspicious elements in his statements but lacked direct proof. The fact that the post office typewriter matched the threatening document did not prove Sam produced the letter, since many people could have used the device. The anonymous calls from the post office also fell short of incrimination, without a way to identify the caller in the limited technology context of the 1950s. Additionally, newly surveyed locations from the main route, side trails, deep forest areas to the river yielded no new evidence. Every investigative direction led to a dead end. After weeks of sweeping, the search teams had to acknowledge that no feasible unchecked areas remained within the Edgewood vicinity that still aligned with the case timeline and field facts. With no new progress, Edgewood police faced a familiar situation in missing persons cases of that period. Despite numerous anomalies, the absence of direct evidence prevented advancement or reclassification as a criminal case. Instead, it was forced into a waiting status awaiting new witnesses, new evidence, or the body's appearance. After multiple internal meetings and evaluation by the district prosecutor's office, the Evelyn Carter missing persons file was officially designated a cold case. This meant the active investigation was terminated, related documents archived, all physical evidence sealed, and the case would only be reopened upon the emergence of new facts. Placing the case into cold case status was not abandonment, but recognition that the investigation, at that time, had reached the limits of 1955's technical capabilities and resources. In the many years that followed, no additional traces or reports related to Evelyn were submitted to police. Edgewood gradually returned to normal life, but the file on her disappearance remained dormant in the police department's storage, a case without resolution, suspended between suspicions but lacking evidence for charges, awaiting a future opportunity to be reopened. Nearly 43 years after Evelyn Carter's disappearance, stalled and was transferred to cold case status, an unexpected natural event suddenly brought the case back into the light. In the spring of 1998, the Edgewood area experienced a prolonged period of heavy rain lasting several days, causing severe soil erosion in the forest and exposing previously stable soil layers that had remained undisturbed for decades. At a forest point about half a mile northeast of where Evelyn's truck had been found, an area previously dense with tree roots and rarely visited, a group of land clearing workers preparing to open A1 service road discovered human bone fragments lying exposed on the surface after the topsoil was washed away. Initially, they thought the remains might belong to an animal, but the distinctive shape of a forearm bone segment and part of the pelvic structure prompted them to immediately halt work and report to Edgewood police. Upon arrival, police confirmed the discovery area showed fresh erosion signs, soil carried away by runoff, fallen tree roots, and discontinuous soil layers, indicating the remains may have been buried or naturally covered for a long period without human detection. Recognizing the significance of the find, police cordoned off the scene and summoned the Jefferson County forensics team to take over excavation. During careful layer-by-layer excavation, the forensics team uncovered additional bone portions, ribs, a femur, and a relatively intact portion of the skull. Nearby, they found fragments of dark fabric that had rotted over time but retained identifiable characteristics. Thick cotton material and simple stitching, consistent with rural women's clothing from the 1950s. A remaining metal shirt button, worn but still shaped, matched descriptions of the type on a blouse Evelyn commonly wore according to family accounts. Near the bone location, forensics also recovered a small women's shoe in a petite size, with the leather decayed but the rubber sole still structurally intact. The shoe style aligned with the description the Carter family had provided in the 1955 missing persons report. When all the evidence items were placed together, the fabric scraps, button, shoe, and human bones, the forensics team assessed a high likelihood that these were the remains of an adult woman matching Evelyn's age at the time of disappearance. They measured skeletal features and compared them to Evelyn's estimated height, finding very close proportions. During deeper excavation, forensics discovered another crucial item, a small metal hair clip, rusted but bearing a distinctive pattern that Evelyn's mother had described in the initial investigation. With a substantial matching chain of evidence, the investigative team immediately contacted the Edgewood Police Department Records Office, requesting retrieval of the 1955 cold case file related to Evelyn Carter's disappearance. When the old file was pulled from storage, thin, faded with age, but still clearly documenting every event, investigators in 1998 cross-referenced the descriptions of Evelyn's clothing, accessories, and physical characteristics with the recovered items. Every detail aligned closely enough to constitute a preliminary identification pending official forensic confirmation. With the remains discovered in the Edgewood forest near the abandoned truck site and within the original search radius, but at a depth previously obscured by vegetation. The long-ago disappearance, Nile, longer appeared as merely a mysterious vanishing, but as physical confirmation of the victim's death. This immediately reactivated the entire Evelyn Carter file under 1990s cold case protocols. The investigative team reopened the case with support from more advanced forensic technology, including bone analysis to determine cause of death, DNA comparison, and re-evaluation of all 1955 evidence under a modern perspective. The 1998 discovery of the remains marked the most significant turning point since Evelyn vanished, opening the first opportunity in over 4 decades to determine what happened and who was responsible for her death, while bringing the case back into the spotlight of the Edgewood community that had long believed the story would remain forever unresolved. After the remains were discovered in the Edgewood forest, and accompanying evidence showed strong matches to Evelyn Carter's 1955 description, the body was transferred to the Jefferson County Forensics Lab for examination using modern methods in 1998. Although decades had degraded or decomposed much soft tissue, the skeletal structure remained sufficiently intact for forensic experts to conduct detailed analysis to determine cause of death and assess whether the death resulted from accident or criminal act. The skull was examined first, as this area often clearly reveals signs of external force. Experts identified 3 large fractures running diagonally from the forehead to the temple and from the crown downward to the back of the skull. The fractures were irregular, varied in depth, and showed characteristics of being caused by a hard but non-sharp surfaced object. Around the fracture points were fan-shaped radiating cracks, a pattern typical of impact trauma from concentrated force in a limited area, commonly seen in assaults with blunt objects, such as wooden clubs or metal bars. The presence of multiple fracture points with differing impact directions indicated the victim had been struck repeatedly, not just a single impact as in typical fall accidents. Next, the arm and forearm bones were inspected. On the left ulna and radius were incomplete fractures forming overlapping bone fragments, a pattern forensic pathology terms a defensive fracture or perifracture, often occurring when a victim raises an arm to protect the head in a defensive posture. This reinforced the likelihood of an active assault rather than a self-inflicted fall. The shoulder and clavicle bones also showed minor cracks consistent with the body being forcefully pushed or struck during resistance. Experts then analyzed the wrist and ankle bones. Here, they observed encircling indentations approximately 3 to 4 millimeters wide, with wear and depth characteristic of binding with rope or coarse material. Although the binding material had fully decomposed after decades, the impressions on the bones remained distinct due to prolonged compression near the time of death. These marks ruled out self-binding or entrapment in an accident scenario, as a person unable to move would not produce such deep, symmetrical binding impressions on the wrists. Additionally, on the rib bones, forensics found 2 mixed old and new fracture points, suggesting the victim may have been pressed or subjected to strong force on the torso before death. Combining these injuries with the condition of the truck abandoned in the forest in 1955, experts assessed that the victim was likely restrained, taken to another location in the forest, then assaulted with a blunt object before the body was hastily buried or left to decompose naturally over time. Examination of bone wear and natural preservation features indicated the remains had lain in the soil for an extended period, consistent with Evelyn's disappearance timeframe. This ruled out the possibility that the body was placed at the site later, confirming the victim died at or near the discovery location. In determining the mechanism of death, forensic experts concluded that the most severe damage was to the skull, where at least one very powerful blow had shattered the bone structure in an impact fracture pattern. Based on fracture direction and breakage model, the force was sufficient to cause immediate death or render the victim unconscious before further assault. Summarizing all injuries, skull fractures, defensive fractures, binding marks, and chest trauma, forensics determined this could not have been an accident from falling, a falling tree, or any natural factor. The only scenario consistent with the evidence chain was that the victim was deliberately assaulted with a blunt object while restrained, then left in the forest. Thus, the cause of death was concluded as traumatic brain injury from blunt force impact, and the manner of death was homicide. With the official forensic conclusion, Evelyn Carter's 1955 disappearance was formally reclassified as a homicide, a crime concealed for over 4 decades, and only revealed by the unexpected exposure of forest soil after the major rain event of 1998. After the 1998 forensic report officially determined Evelyn Carter's death to be homicide rather than accident, The Jefferson County Cold Case Unit immediately took over the entire 1955 file for a comprehensive re-review, employing both modern technology and updated scene analysis standards. The group's first task was to collect all prior witness statements, previously recovered evidence, scene notes, search diagrams, original timelines, and every document related to the disappearance. The aged, discolored documents were digitized for easier cross-referencing and analysis. The investigative team divided the file into three main data groups. 1. Witness and related party statements. 2. Evidence collected in 1955. 3. Timeline and established event markers from the early phase. They then cross-referenced each group to identify contradictions, discrepancies, and unresolved gaps from the initial investigation. In reviewing statements, the team paid particular attention to two sources: neighbor accounts and Samuel Carter's statements. Neighbors confirmed the truck leaving the driveway at 7:10 a.m., while Sam, in his first interview, asserted he left home around 7:20, creating an unexplained time discrepancy because if Sam was still in the house, he should have heard or seen Evelyn's truck depart. The old file contained no deep analysis of this conflict, as police at the time did not view it as critical. The Cold Case Unit flagged this as a major inconsistency requiring re-examination. Next was the discrepancy regarding Sam's appearance at the post office. In 1955, due to lack of detailed records, police could not verify exactly when Sam arrived at work. However, personnel logs showed no one signed off on his shift in the 8:09 a.m. window that day, rendering his claim of arriving on time unverified. The 1955 investigators lacked sufficient evidence to treat this as suspicious, but the Cold Case Unit viewed it as an unavoidable time gap. Another key portion of the file was the anonymous letter found in Evelyn's bedroom. In 1955, police only conducted a general assessment and noted it as unusual, without in-depth examination of typeface or typewriter model due to equipment limitations of the era. Now, knowing the letter was typed on a Royal Quiet Deluxe, matching the machine at the post office, the Cold Case Unit immediately placed the anonymous letter notation into the group of evidence directly linked to a potential suspect. The unit also re-examined the original timeline to reconstruct Evelyn's disappearance day with higher accuracy. They marked confirmed independent source timelines. 7:10 a.m. time truck leaves Carter driveway. 7:30 × 7:40 truck appears at Edgewood Forest Trail per witness. 7:40 × 45 truck abandoned under control. Approximately 7,040 to 8:10 period when Sam's whereabouts were unconfirmed. This reconstructed timeline formed a far more coherent sequence than the 1955 file. The team then cross-referenced 1955 evidence: the undamaged truck, footprints and tire marks around the vehicle, Evelyn's handkerchief near the forest area, light undergrowth disturbance, and multiple mismatched footprint sets. In the old file, these traces were merely recorded without deep analysis tools, but with current data, the Cold Case Unit viewed them as clear indicators that the victim was taken into the forest alive or after restraint. They paid particular attention to the larger-sized footprints not matching Evelyn's, proving the presence of at least one other person. Regarding Sam, the team compiled a summary based on 1955 statements and post-reopening facts. He could not prove his morning presence, had access to Evelyn's vehicle, had access to the post office typewriter, and from newly retrieved exchange logs, was the only person present at the post office during the anonymous calls. Analyzing Sam's statements from a 1998 perspective, the Cold Case Unit observed a pattern of evasion around specific time markers, especially the 7:10 8:15 a.m. window precisely aligning with the truck's full movement and field traces. Implausible points such as Sam not remembering exactly when he left home, not hearing the truck leave the driveway, or not being sure when he arrived at the post office became pivotal in assessing credibility. The Cold Case Unit continued reviewing overlooked ancillary information from 1955. One neighbor had mentioned the Carter home lights stayed on later than usual the night before the disappearance. Another witness reported hearing strange sounds in the forest, but was dismissed at the time. Both details were incorporated into the summary as they supported the possibility that the victim faced danger before being taken into the forest. After compiling all documents, the Cold Case Unit listed unresolved contradictions from the old file. 1. Discrepancy in Sam's departure time from home. 2. Discrepancy in Sam's arrival time at the post office. 3. Anonymous calls originating from the post office. 4. Anonymous letter typed on equipment Sam had access to. 5. Mismatched footprints near the scene. 6. Evidence of binding prior to death. 7. The truck driven deliberately, not randomly abandoned. When placed alongside the 1998 skeletal findings, all these contradictions formed a completely different investigative picture. This was no longer an unexplained disappearance, but an organized homicide concealed through multiple sequential actions to mislead investigators. The cold case unit then fully reconstructed the overall timeline, integrating 1955 data and 1998 analysis, creating a seamless event framework. The victim's departure from home, the truck's appearance in the forest, the potential suspect's behavioral gap, and the approximate time the body was buried or covered. This new timeline became the foundation for the unit to continue examining critical case elements, paving the way for a comprehensive reinvestigation after more than 4 decades. Right after the cold case unit completed its review of the entire 1955 file and reconstructed the overall timeline, they moved to a critical step that could not have been performed at the time of the original case, re-examining the anonymous letter using more advanced typewriter analysis technology. In 1955, police could only generally identify that the letter was typed on a Royal Quiet Deluxe, but they could not distinguish individual characteristic wear patterns to pinpoint the exact machine that produced the text. By 1998, with the aid of digitized character analysis systems and databases of typing patterns from vintage typewriter models, the cold case unit was able to compare minute details, ink density variations, character misalignment, key wear levels, and distinctive impression marks between the anonymous document and the sample set collected from the remaining Royal Quiet Deluxe machines still existing in Edgewood. The process began by scanning the entire anonymous letter at high resolution and converting the characters into analyzable data format. The character analysis software allowed isolation of each letter based on ink impressions and determination of uneven ink absorption on the paper surface. The results revealed 3 distinct error groups. The E key showed faintness at the left corner, the R key was slightly shifted downward from the baseline, and the period punctuation printed approximately half a millimeter lower than the text line. These features were entered into the system to search for matching pattern sequences in the National Royal Quiet Deluxe database. After comparison against more than 100 archive samples, the software confirmed that this combination of errors was extremely rare, occurring only when a machine had seen prolonged use and certain keys had worn in a specific direction. When the technical team compared this data against the 9 surviving Royal Quiet Deluxe machines in Edgewood, the results narrowed quickly. 6 machines produced no compatible character errors. 2 machines generated some similar errors but not enough to be considered the source. The single machine that reproduced the full set of wear and misalignment errors was the Royal Quiet Deluxe, located in the Edgewood Post Office workroom, the same place where Samuel Carter worked in 1955. To confirm, the technical team requested retyping the letter's content on the post office machine using an old ink ribbon that had been preserved to simulate the actual conditions of the era as closely as possible. The simulated typing produced an almost identical result. Character misalignment positions matched exactly, ink depth on the A and R keys aligned with the original, and the period punctuation remained lower than the text line. This was not random similarity, but a distinctive mechanical match what experts evaluated as the typewriter fingerprint of the device. After definitively establishing that the anonymous letter was typed on the machine from the Edgewood post office, the cold case unit immediately returned to the more critical question: who had access to that machine at the time the letter was produced? The access list was recross-referenced. All 1955 post office employees, part-time staff, the mail carrier, and 3 residents who had occasionally used the machine for personal correspondence. However, cross-checking against old statements and work histories, the investigative team quickly eliminated most of the group. The mail carrier worked mornings and left the post office before the machine was likely used. The 2 part-time employees only worked afternoon shifts. The 3 residents who borrowed the machine had clear purposes, verifiable letter contents, and no reason to access it during the suspect time frame. When these factors were placed together, the cold case unit realized that only 2 individuals had unrestricted, unsupervised access and were present in the building at the probable time the anonymous letter was created: the post office administrative chief and Samuel Carter. For the administrative chief, the team discovered he did not use the Royal Quiet Deluxe for internal notes because he had a more modern machine assigned specifically for reporting duties. Moreover, no data linked him to Evelyn Carter or her family. In contrast, Samuel Carter used the Royal Quiet Deluxe regularly according to coworker statements, was present at the post office during the exact windows of the anonymous calls, and had an unaccounted mourning period. The fact that the anonymous letter was typed on a machine to which Sam had direct access while other suspects lacked either the opportunity or reason to use it elevated him to the central focus of the Renew investigation. The cold case unit marked this as a major breakthrough for the first time since 1955. Technical evidence established that the threatening behavior toward Evelyn was carried out using a device tied directly to Sam's workplace environment. This forensic result not only narrowed suspicion toward Samuel Carter, but also provided a solid technical foundation to reevaluate his statements and related behaviors throughout the period before and after Evelyn's disappearance. After the anonymous letter examination results confirmed the document was typed on the Royal Quiet Deluxe at the Edgewood post office, while significantly narrowing the suspect pool toward Samuel Carter, the cold case unit proceeded to a final review of all data on the anonymous phone calls recorded in the 1955 exchange log. The objective of this step was to check consistency between typewriter access, post office phone usage rights, and Sam's presence during the timeframes related to the anonymous letter, thereby assessing whether someone else could have used the equipment in Sam's place. First, the team requested from the Edgewood Exchange intact copies of the logbook pages from the month prior to the disappearance, including faded or faint entries for digital restoration. When the pages were rescanned at high resolution and processed with contrast enhancement software, many entries difficult to read in 1955 became clearer. The team began cross-referencing every call marked "caller identity unknown" or "caller remains silent," considered potentially related to Evelyn. The three previously noted calls fell within the 6:45 to 7:10 p.m. window, and one midday. Upon re-examination of the log details, investigators discovered two additional points not clearly noted in the 1955 file. All anonymous calls originated from the same public payphone in the post office transaction room and were logged at times when only a single employee remained on duty matching Sam's shift. The cold case unit cross-checked old work schedules, coworker statements, and internal post office logs to determine who was present in the building during those hours. The 1955 shift schedule showed the administrative chief left the post office daily before 6 p.m. Part-time employees only worked afternoons and departed by 5:30, while the mail carrier did not use the typing room or public phone and finished his shift by midday. This meant that after 6 p.m., the only person consistently present in the post office was Sam. The midday time frame was also closely scrutinized. During the 12:20 p.m. anonymous call, the only one occurring during business hours, other employees were occupied processing mail in the sorting area, and no one was working in the transaction room where the public phone was located. Checking coworker statements, the cold case unit noted that on that midday, Sam had been assigned to review transaction logs and was frequently present in the area containing the typewriter and public phone. No evidence or statement indicated anyone else entered the transaction room during that interval. The team continued analyzing Edgewood post office operational habits in the 1955 period. Per operating rules, the public payphone was not to be used without an operator present in the lobby area. However, in small-town practice, internal staff could self-dial local calls without operator assistance. The fact that all anonymous calls were local further narrowed the caller to someone familiar with operating the equipment, namely, an experienced post office employee, especially one aware of end-of-shift limitations. When all data was placed on the analysis board, the cold case unit observed a unified pattern. Each anonymous call occurred precisely during windows when Sam was alone, and no other individual was confirmed present or had access to the public phone at those times. To strengthen the conclusion, the team also considered the possibility of an outsider sneaking into the post office to use the phone. However, this was quickly ruled out because the post office was locked after 6:00 p.m., and only key holders could enter the transaction area. The 1955 key log showed only 4 holders: the administrative chief, 2 full-time employees, and Sam. But among them, only Sam stayed late, and no one else had reason to return after closing. No reports of break-ins, forced entry, or intrusion traces existed during the relevant period, further confirming no stranger used the phone. Additionally, one of the 1955 operators, now elderly but still reasonably sharp when re-interviewed in 1998, confirmed that the caller in the anonymous calls remained completely silent except for stating the desired connection, and never spoke directly to the recipient. This aligned with behavior intended to conceal identity rather than someone unfamiliar with phone use. Cross-referencing the log notes with the anonymous letter forensic results, the cold case unit concluded that the entire sequence of behavior related to the anonymous call's frequency, timing, and method of device use matched only one person, Samuel Carter. No evidence showed any other individual present with access or capable of operating the public phone during the critical windows. Re-examining the exchange data not only reinforced prior suspicion, but completely eliminated the possibility of another perpetrator making the calls, logically, systematically, and irrefutably placing Sam as the primary suspect. After the anonymous call data was confirmed to fully align with Samuel Carter's shifts in access rights, the cold case unit proceeded with a technical analysis step impossible for the 1955 investigators, reconstructing the morning timeline of Evelyn Carter's disappearance using light data, shadow patterns, and terrain features from old scene photographs. Forensic experts digitized all photographs of the abandoned truck in the Edgewood forest, including multi-angle shots preserved by local police over 4 decades. Although photo quality was limited by the era's equipment, many lighting and shadow details remained clear enough for analysis with modern light simulation software. The process began by determining the exact coordinates of the truck's discovery site and its orientation. From the original photos, the cold case unit measured the vehicle's shadow, door edge shadows, tree canopy shadows on the ground, and identified the longest shadow direction. Morning light in Edgewood at Alabama's latitude produces distinctly changing shadow angles minute by minute, especially as the sun clears the horizon. Experts input these parameters into astronomical light simulation software calibrated for 1955, thereby determining the time frame best matching the observed shadow lengths. Results showed the vehicle's shadow in the photos was significantly longer than shadows cast later than 8000 a.m. The analysis model indicated the shadow length best fit between 7:32 and 7:41 a.m., depending on varying tree canopy coverage in different shots. This aligned with witness statements of hearing the truck enter the forest around 7:30 to 7:40 and reinforced the time frame of abandonment before 7:45. The analysis team next marked the tilt of the door shadow, side mirror shadow, and shadows from a small cluster of trees on the left side of the truck. These 3 shadow types matched in simulation only around 7:36 a.m., a result with less than 3 minutes of margin for error. This provided the basis to conclude that Evelyn's truck stopped in the Edgewood forest between approximately 7:35 and 7:35 and 7:37 a.m. When inserting this timestamp into the overall timeline, the cold case unit rechecked Sam's statements. He claimed to have left home around 7:20 and arrived at the post office near 8 times. But no witness confirmed this. An internal record showed he did not appear at work before 8:15. A major issue immediately emerged. If Sam left home at 7:20, as originally stated, he could not have abandoned the truck at that forest location around 7:35, because driving time from Edgewood to the trail took at least 12 to 15 minutes. The only matching time frame was if Sam left home exactly when the neighbor heard the truck start 7:10 a.m., rather than 7:20 as he asserted. Applying a real movement model, the cold case unit created a comparison chart. If the driver left home at 7:00, they could reach the forest around 7:00. They could reach the forest around 7:00, 34 to 37. Spend 3 to 7 minutes maneuvering the truck onto the trail and stop before 7:37, matching the light simulation results. If leaving at 7:20 per Sam's claim, the earliest arrival in the forest would be around 7:35 to 7:40. And the process of positioning the truck on the trail would occur 5 to 10 minutes later than the light simulation indicated. This made Sam's timeline inconsistent with clear physical evidence. Checking the tire track photos and tree canopy shadows cast on the ground, the analysis team noted that shadows fell offset to the northeast, consistent with the sun's position around 7:35, 7:38 a.m. If the truck had entered the forest later between 7:45 to 7:57, the tree shadows would have tilted more eastward and lengthened as the sun rose higher, which did not match the photos. Additionally, the small mound shadow beside the wheel was not long enough to reflect a post-7:45 timeframe. All simulations converged on a single window. The truck must have stopped between 7:33 and 7:38. When this timeframe was placed against Sam's described journey, the contradiction became stark. If Sam's statement were accurate, he should have been at the post office when the shadow in the photo was captured. Yet no evidence proved he arrived at work at that time, and internal logs showed he signed no tasks until after 8 a.m., cross-referencing the new timeline with terrain and shadow analysis. The cold case unit concluded that Sam could not have been at the post office when the truck was abandoned and could not have left home as late as his initial claim. Only one timeline fit the light data. Sam left home precisely when the neighbor heard the truck start 7:10 n.m., drove directly to Edgewood Forest, and abandoned the vehicle at the noted location around 7:35. Reconstructing the timeline using light and terrain data not only validated witness statement accuracy, but directly refuted most of Sam's account, placing him at the center of suspicion through objective, unadjustable physical evidence rather than subjective statements. After successfully reconstructing the timeline using light and terrain data confirming Evelyn's truck was abandoned in the forest around 7:35 a.m., a time frame in complete contradiction to Samuel Carter's statements. The cold case unit expanded the investigation by recontacting surviving witnesses after 43 years to determine whether any overlooked or underexplored details from 1955 existed. The team began by identifying residents who lived near the Edgewood Forest area or along the route from the Carter home to the trail, including those who were teenagers at the time. Many witnesses were now elderly with faded memories, but several still recalled distinct anomalies from the morning Evelyn disappeared. The first witness recontacted was Mr. Giero, Harold Green, who was 17 at the time and lived in a house about half a mile from the forest entrance. He had been interviewed by police in 1955, but only provided information about seeing Evelyn's truck enter the forest. When re-interviewed in 1998, Harold added a detail he had considered unimportant at the time. He had seen a man carrying something quite heavy, long in shape, and wrapped in coarse cloth, walking deeper into the forest about 20 to 30 minutes after the truck entered. He could not clearly see the man's face due to distance and low morning light obscured by tree canopy, but he remembered the man wearing a white shirt and dark pants clothing matching descriptions of the outfit Sam wore to work daily. Although he could not positively identify the man, the description was recorded because it significantly aligned with new investigative facts. The team next located Mrs. Dorothy Hale, who had lived in a house near the dirt road leading into the forest. In 1955, she reported hearing a fast-running engine that morning, but when re-interviewed in 1998, she recalled an additional detail after the engine sound. She heard what sounded like a heavy object falling to the ground, followed by a dragging then intermittent noise, possibly from the object hitting roots or uneven soil. At the time, she thought someone was hauling items or discarding goods, but did not consider it important enough to mention in the initial interview. When the cold case unit explained the truck's location and corresponding time frame, she confirmed the sound she heard very likely occurred right after the truck stopped in the forest. Another witness, Mr. Marcus Little, who was a teenager who often hunted early mornings, stated he had once heard a man calling softly or muttering in the forest, distinct from natural animal sounds. He said he was unsure whose voice it was and the content was unclear, only carrying an urgent tone. In 1955, when he reported this, police suggested he might have heard a hunter or woodcutter, but when re-interviewed after 43 years, he said he had never seen anyone else in that area early in the morning except around the time Evelyn disappeared. These fragmented memories, when placed alongside the new findings on the remains, anonymous letter, call data, and light analysis, gradually formed a logical chain that the original investigation could not connect. The cold case unit cross-referenced Harold Green's description of a heavy object wrapped in cloth with the 1998 forensic report on binding marks on the wrist and ankle bones, suggesting the victim may have been carried into the forest while unconscious or restrained. Mrs. Hale's account of a heavy impact sound matched the possibility that the suspect dragged or lifted the body across rough terrain. Meanwhile, Marcus Little's recollection indicated the presence of a single man in the forest precisely when the truck was abandoned. The cold case unit continued screening the remaining suspect circle to determine who could have been in the area at that time. All previously considered individuals had alibis or no reason to enter Edgewood Forest. Only Sam, who had no confirmed presence that morning, and an unaccounted 7,815 window matched the full described behavior, cross-referencing the white shirt, dark pants clothing description with post office records. The cold case unit confirmed this was Sam's standard daily work uniform in 1955. Although the witness could not see the face clearly, the description of build and gait while carrying a heavy object aligned with Sam's recorded physical profile. These statements, though indirect, created a series of coincidences. A man dressed like Sam during Sam's unprovable time frame, carrying a heavy object into the forest exactly where the body was found 43 years later. The cold case unit assessed witness reliability based on consistency between descriptions and physical evidence, particularly the remains location, investigative routes, light traces, and vehicle journey. The results showed that while the statements were insufficient for a conclusion alone, they held high value in reinforcing suspicion grounded in technical evidence and re-established timelines. By gathering surviving witness accounts and cross-referencing them with new facts, the cold case unit significantly strengthened the suspicion that Samuel Carter was not only involved but likely directly participated in Evelyn Carter's final journey on the morning of 1955 and, suspicion, impossible to clarify earlier, but now difficult to refute, when linked to the full chain of evidence recovered after 43 years. After collecting additional statements from surviving witnesses and noting the high degree of consistency between the 1955 behavioral descriptions and the 1998 excavation findings, the cold case unit decided to request a supplemental search warrant for the former property of Samuel Carter, including the storage shed located behind the house where Sam lived at the time of Evelyn's disappearance. Although the land had changed hands multiple times and the shed had been partially rebuilt, investigators assessed that small items of evidence or documents hidden years earlier could still exist beneath the floor or in old wooden crevices. The search warrant was approved by the court based on the new chain of evidence, and the investigative team conducted a comprehensive inspection, this time assisted by ground-penetrating magnetometry and metal detectors to identify suspicious subsurface locations in the shed. The scan results revealed several anomalies, including one point near the southwest corner of the shed that produced a strong metal signal and a distinctly separated soil structure compared to the surrounding area. This was an indication that the ground may have been previously disturbed or altered. The cold case unit decided to excavate that location first. Upon removing the old floorboards, the team discovered that the soil beneath had been compacted unevenly, with areas of slight subsidence and others abnormally hard-packed. After digging down about 1 foot, the shovel blade struck something hard, producing a hollow metallic sound. Digging a little deeper, they uncovered an old tin box that was partially rusted but still intact. The box had been buried quite carefully nearly 2 feet below the surface, indicating it was not a casually dropped item, but one deliberately concealed for a long period. The tin box was temporarily sealed at the scene and transported to the forensics lab for controlled opening. When the lid was lifted, 3 key pieces of evidence were inside: a set of time-yellowed papers containing incomplete typed passages, a tattered, torn fragment of fabric, and a small metal lighter engraved with the initials SC. First, experts examined the set of papers. The content included several passages closely resembling the anonymous letter sent to Evelyn, but with typos or strike-throughs indicating they were drafts prior to finalizing the actual letter. The typing samples from the drafts were submitted for analysis and yielded results. All characters exhibited the E key corner faintness, R key downward shift, and low period punctuation matching exactly the Royal Quiet Deluxe at the Edgewood post office. This proved that the owner of the tin box had retained drafts of the threatening letter and had access to the machine used in the case. The second item, the fabric fragment, was immediately compared to the fabric sample recovered near Evelyn's truck in 1955. Despite decades of decomposition, the weave structure and stitching pattern remained sufficiently intact for analysis. The results showed both pieces belonged to the same type of thick cotton fabric commonly used for household aprons in that era. Notably, the light blue thread stitching, described by Evelyn's mother as hand-sewn work she had done for her daughter, matched perfectly. This proved that the person who hid the tin box had close contact with Evelyn's personal items in the time frame close to her disappearance. When the third item was presented, the metal lighter engraved SSA. No one on the investigative team still doubted a direct connection to Samuel Carter. This style of lighter was relatively expensive in the 1950s and commonly carried daily by men. Sam's personnel file at the post office confirmed he once carried an engraved lighter, a birthday gift from coworkers. The 1955 Lost and Found log noted that Sam reported losing the lighter about 1 week before Evelyn disappeared, a detail that, decades later, became increasingly suspicious because it aligned with the appearance of the first anonymous letter. When the cold case unit examined the lighter's surface, they found small scratch marks from friction, most likely occurring when it was placed inside the tin box or rubbed against another object before burial. Investigators reviewed the 1955 shed inspection report and noted that at the time, police had only performed a surface check and did not dig beneath the floor because there was no reason to suspect anything hidden. Therefore, the possibility that Sam personally buried the tin box shortly after the crime was entirely plausible. With the discovery of threatening letter drafts, a fabric fragment linked to the victim, and a lighter engraved with Sam's initials all contained in a single carefully buried tin box in his former shed, the cold case unit obtained the first direct physical link between Sam and the case's key evidence. These three items not only reinforced suspicion of preparatory and concealment behavior, but also formed concrete physical proof, a major turning point in the long-dormant Evelyn Carter investigation. After more than 4 decades. After the tin box was excavated from Samuel Carter's former shed and the 3 pieces of evidence inside the threatening letter drafts, the fabric fragment matching 1955 evidence, and the lighter engraved SC were confirmed to have direct ties to the case, the cold case unit decided to confront Sam with the compiled chain of evidence, presented in a logical investigative sequence to test his reactions to the newly established connections. The confrontation took place in an interview room at the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, where Sam, now an elderly man, was informed of the file reactivation and the new forensic discoveries. The investigative team began by placing a comprehensive timeline diagram on the table, based on light data, witness time markers, movement analysis, and Sam's own 1955 statements. They pointed out the discrepancy between the 7:10 a.m. mark when the neighbor heard the truck leave the driveway and Sam's claim of 7:02 then showed the light simulation confirming Evelyn's truck was abandoned in the forest around 7:35 to 7:37, consistent with a route starting from the Carter home at 7:10 rather than 7:20. When confronted with the light data, Sam responded vaguely that he didn't remember the times clearly, but could not explain why his statements consistently shifted depending on the questions. Next, investigators presented the analysis of the 1955 anonymous calls. They showed copies of the exchange log, highlighting that all calls occurred during Sam's shift or when he was alone at the Edgewood post office. They emphasized that no other employee was present in the transaction room where the public phone was located at those times, and all calls were local consistent only with someone familiar with operating the equipment and the manual exchange process. When asked if he could explain why every call happened precisely when he was alone in the building, Sam replied that someone might have sneaked in, but investigators immediately countered with the fact that the post office was locked after hours and only 4 people held keys, 3 of whom had alibis. Sam offered no further rebuttal. The investigative team moved to the anonymous letter portion. They placed 2 typed samples in front of Sam. One was the 1955 anonymous letter sent to Evelyn. The other, a simulation typed on the Edgewood post office, Royal Quiet Deluxe, under era-accurate conditions. Both documents exhibited identical wear and misalignment errors in minute detail. E key faint at the left corner, R key shifted downward, period punctuation lower than the text line. Investigators asked Sam why the anonymous letter could have been typed on the machine he used daily. Sam answered that many people use that machine, but could not name anyone else who might have accessed it at the time the letter was produced. The cold case unit continued by presenting the forensic report on Evelyn's remains, defensive fractures on the arm bones, binding impressions on the wrists and ankles, 3 skull fractures caused by a blunt object. They asked Sam if he could explain the victim's death by violence rather than accident. Sam shook his head, insisting he knew nothing about that, but the team pointed out that the remains location was near the trail where his truck appeared that morning and within the area where a witness saw a man carrying a heavy wrapped object into the forest, a description matching Sam's 1955 clothing and build. When Sam objected that the witness remembered wrong, investigators presented detailed accounts from the 3 surviving witnesses, one who saw a man carrying a long object into the forest, one who heard a heavy object impact the ground, one who heard a man's urgent muttering, all aligned with the time frame established by light analysis, forcing Sam to confront the reality that independent memory fragments from multiple witnesses combined with technical data all pointed in one direction. Next, the cold case unit placed the excavated tin box on the table. Wearing gloves, they carefully opened it and presented each item in sequence. First was the threatening letter draft analyzed to confirm 100% it was typed on the very Royal Quiet Deluxe from the post office. Sam remained silent when asked why a draft was found in his shed. Next was the fabric fragment matching evidence recovered near Evelyn's truck in 1955. Investigators pointed out the light blue stitching described by Evelyn's mother. Sam stammered that he didn't know what it was, but could offer no reasonable explanation for its presence in a box buried deep beneath his shed floor. Finally, the lighter engraved SC was presented. Investigators reminded Sam that he had reported losing this lighter 1 week before Evelyn disappeared. When asked why an item he claimed was lost was found in a tin box alongside threatening letter drafts and Evelyn's fabric fragment, Sam lowered his head and did not respond. The investigative team posed the final question: could Sam provide any logical explanation to prove that the entire chain of evidence morning timeline on the day of the incident, anonymous letter typed on his accessible machine, calls from the post office during his shifts, witnesses seeing a man carrying a heavy object, tin box containing threatening drafts, and his lighter had no connection to him? Sam offered no rebuttal, no evidence, no specific denial of any point, only repeating that he didn't remember and he didn't do anything. The cold case unit noted in the record that Sam provided no reasonable counter-argument to the compiled chain of evidence, a consistent, tightly linked sequence that left no plausible gap for innocence. After the confrontation in which Samuel Carter offered no reasonable rebuttal to the chain of evidence presented by the cold case unit, the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office formally began preparing the arrest warrant application. Based on the determination that the cumulative evidence, including the reestablished timeline via light analysis, anonymous letter forensics, exchange data, surviving witness statements, items in the buried tin box, and the forensic conclusion on cause of death surpassed the probable cause threshold, sufficient to identify Sam as the primary suspect in Evelyn Carter's 1955 homicide. The arrest warrant application submitted to the judge included a reconstructed map of the disappearance morning journey, a comparison chart of Sam's stated timeline against actual facts, technical analysis of the Royal Quiet Deluxe typewriter, forensic report on binding marks and injuries to the victim's bones, photographs of the tin box evidence, and sworn affidavits from witnesses re-interviewed and recorded in 1998. The prosecutor emphasized that the evidence did not exist in isolation, but formed a tightly interconnected sequence of time and behavior, creating a consistent investigative picture that completely eliminated the possibility of random coincidence or involvement by anyone else. After reviewing the full file, the judge signed the arrest warrant for Samuel Carter on charges of first-degree murder, kidnapping, fabrication of evidence, and obstruction of justice. The warrant was immediately forwarded to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office, which promptly dispatched a small tactical team to Homewood, where Sam was then residing, to execute the arrest under safe conditions and ensure no evidence tampering. Sam, now in his 70s, lived alone in a small house on the outskirts of Homewood. The police chose an early morning time to minimize witnesses and reduce the risk of Sam destroying documents or evidence should he become aware of the warrant. Upon approach, Sam was sitting on the porch, apparently unaware that the warrant had been signed overnight. The team followed procedure. 2 officers approached from the front. 1 took an observation position on the side of the house, and a 4th provided rear support. After announcing the warrant and reading his legal rights as required, Sam did not resist but rose slowly, though his expression clearly showed collapse. He was handcuffed and led to the patrol car in silence, offering no explanation and asking no questions about why he was being arrested, a reaction investigators noted as an indication he understood the reason for the arrest. After Sam was transported, the search team entered the residence under the accompanying search warrant. They conducted a thorough sweep, with particular focus on areas likely to contain documents, old wooden cabinets, desk drawers, personal keepsake boxes, and repair item shelves. In a locked desk drawer, police found an old notebook containing scattered notes from the 1950s, including partial sentences related to following, keeping distance, and not letting anyone know. Though not directly naming Evelyn, the implications were sufficient to catalog as evidence. Additionally, police seized a small wooden box containing various personal items from Sam's post office days, including an old typewriter ribbon fragment, transaction log note cards used while on switchboard duty, and a small record of internal shift schedules from 1954 to 1956. All items were sealed for further comparative analysis. The search team also inspected the new shed area, though not the original shed where the tin box was found, to determine whether Sam had repeated the pattern of concealing evidence. Metal detector sweeps around the shed floor detected no strong signals like before, but did register a rusted nail and a broken tool fragment unrelated to the case, yet properly documented per protocol. After completing the search, All evidence was transferred to secure storage for forensic processing. Sam was brought to the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office in a cooperative but silent state. The record noted that he did not immediately request an attorney, nor did he deny or affirm anything, simply sitting with head bowed and hands clenched in front of him, as though aware that the weight of the accumulated evidence far exceeded any possibility of denial. The arrest of Sam and Homewood marked the critical transition from investigation to prosecution, paving the way for the next phase in closing the Evelyn Carter case after 43 years unsolved. After Samuel Carter was arrested in Homewood and all newly seized evidence was placed into forensic storage, the Jefferson County District Attorney's Office began the critical phase, preparing the criminal prosecution file. This was not merely collecting evidence but constructing a complete argumentative structure that connected motive means opportunity. Integrating data from two investigative phases separated by 43 years and proving that Sam's chain of behavior was not random coincidence, but a deliberate, continuous, and unified criminal progression. The prosecutor began by synthesizing motive, focusing on 1955 facts showing underlying tension in the relationship between Sam and Evelyn, evidenced by Evelyn receiving threatening letters and Sam being the only suspect with access to the typewriter that produced them. They argued that the anonymous letters were the first step in preparatory criminal behavior, instilling fear, isolating the victim, and misdirecting investigation by creating the appearance of an unknown stalker. Sam's motive was further reinforced by the discovery of letter drafts in the tin box buried under the shed floor, a clear act of concealment, demonstrating an effort to control the narrative from the outset. The prosecutor then shifted to analyzing the method of the crime, reconstructing the homicide process based on the technically re-established timeline from the cold case unit. They clearly demonstrated that someone drove Evelyn's truck out of the house at 7:10 a.m., took it into the Edgewood forest, and abandoned it around 7:35 to 7:37 a.m. The analysis of shadows and terrain in the old scene photographs proved this timeframe with only minutes of margin for error, creating an irrefutable scientific foundation. When cross-referenced with Sam's statements, the prosecutor highlighted the 7,815 unaccounted window that Sam could not explain, while showing that his claimed departure time was inconsistent and shifted depending on when he was questioned. All these facts were combined to prove that Sam had both sufficient opportunity to access the victim and the capability to move between the relevant locations, while being the only suspect in the circle with the conditions to carry out the entire criminal sequence. In the opportunity analysis section, the prosecution file pointed out that every field element narrowed the suspect pool to Sam alone: access to Evelyn's vehicle, unverified presence during the exact time the truck was abandoned, use of the post office typewriter, and perfect alignment between Sam's shifts and the timing of the anonymous calls. Opportunity was no longer a hypothesis, but a consistent chain of data tightly linked to Sam's actions before and after Evelyn's disappearance. The prosecutor continued integrating data from the 1955 and 1998 phases, building a long-term chronological argumentative foundation. The 1955 phase provided the initial links: threatening letters, abandoned truck, forest traces, Sam's inconsistent statements, and his unprovable time gaps. The 1998 phase supplied the pivotal links: discovery of remains showing binding marks and blunt force trauma consistent with assault. Modern forensic re-examination of the anonymous letter. Exchange data proving the anonymous caller could only have been Sam. Supplementary witness accounts describing behavior matching Sam on the morning of the crime. And finally, the tin box containing threatening letter drafts, Evelyn's fabric fragment, and the lighter engraved SC. When all were strung together, the criminal picture emerged uniformly. Sam prepared with threatening letters, stalked Evelyn, lured or restrained the victim, took her into the forest early that morning, assaulted her with a blunt object, concealed the body, and returned to the post office to establish an alibi. The prosecution file placed each piece of evidence precisely in its position within the accusatory structure. The letter drafts were used to prove planning behavior. The matching fabric fragment from 1955 demonstrated direct contact between Sam and the victim. The lighter engraved with Sam's initials showed his presence during preparation and concealment. Forensic results proved the violent nature of the death. Light analysis proved the timeline. Exchange data proved Sam was the only one capable of making the distracting calls, and witness statements reinforced Sam's presence in the forest at the critical moment. The prosecutor drafted a summary argument emphasizing that no piece of evidence in the file could exist independently without connecting to Sam, while no element in the chain pointed to any reasonable alternative suspect. The accusatory structure achieved a high level of consistency, motive threatening letters and control, means restraint, assault, fabrication, opportunity unique time frame and access, and outcome body hidden in the forest discovered 43 years later. With the full integration of data into a logical system, the criminal prosecution file was completed, marking the transition from investigation to trial preparation in a case once thought to be unsolvable forever. The trial of Samuel Carter took place in the fall of 1999 at the Jefferson County Courthouse, where the prosecutor presented the entire case-breaking process. The truck abandoned in the forest around 7:35 a.m., mismatched footprints and tire marks indicating abnormal movement. The handkerchief dropped near the scene. The anonymous letter, and inconsistencies in Sam's initial statements. From there, the trial moved to the forensic presentation, the backbone of the accusatory argument. The first forensic expert called to testify described the injuries on Evelyn's remains excavated in 1998, 3 skull fractures from blunt force blows, clear binding impressions on the wrists and ankles, defensive bone fractures showing the victim attempted to shield herself before the assault. The jury was shown a 3D model reconstructing the mechanism of death, confirming this was deliberate homicide rather than accident. Next, the prosecutor presented a graphic timeline analysis, a crucial part proving Sam's presence during the crime window. On the courtroom screen, light data was simulated to demonstrate that 7:33 to 7:38 a.m. was the only period when the shadows in the scene photographs matched the natural light conditions in Edgewood that day. This made Sam's claim of leaving home at 7:20 completely incompatible with reality. Only the 7:10 mark when the neighbor heard the truck leave the driveway fit the physical evidence. The forensic light analysis, a modern investigative technique in 1998, became the key to proving Sam's timeline could not be accurate. Following the timeline portion, the prosecutor turned to physical evidence, particularly what was found in the tin box buried under Sam's shed floor. The threatening letter drafts were presented in court, and the typewriter analysis expert pointed out each character matching the Royal Quiet Deluxe at the Edgewood post office, the machine Sam used daily in 1955. When the character simulation from that machine was projected beside Sam's drafts, the jury clearly saw every instance of key wear, character shift, and low period punctuation matching exactly, creating a near-silent courtroom. The fabric fragment from the tin box was directly compared to the fragment recovered near Evelyn's truck in 1955. The light blue stitching and hand-sewn pattern matched perfectly with Evelyn's mother's description, making Sam's possession of the fragment inexplicable under any innocent hypothesis. The lighter engraved SC was introduced immediately afterward, a highly personal item that Sam himself had reported lost in 1955, exactly 1 week before Evelyn disappeared. When the old fingerprint expert testified that the metal still retained wear patterns consistent with long-term storage, the jury understood the lighter was not lost, but deliberately concealed. The next phase of the trial focused on exchange data and witness testimony. The prosecutor called the 1955 switchboard operator, now very elderly, to testify. She confirmed that all anonymous calls occurred when only Sam remained on duty at the Edgewood post office. Additionally, shift schedules and internal logs showed no one else was present in the building when the calls were made. A 1955-era telephone model was brought into court to demonstrate that only those experienced with internal local dialing could place calls without operator assistance, and Sam was the only one fitting that description. Surviving 1955 witnesses were also summoned. Mr. Harold Green recounted seeing a man of build similar to Sam carrying a long-wrapped object into the forest. Mrs. Bem, Dorothy Hale described hearing a heavy impact and dragging sounds across uneven ground. Mr. Pruschel detail, Marcus Little recounted hearing a man's urgent muttering in the forest all within the time frame established by forensic light analysis. Though these testimonies were not direct evidence, they formed a powerful corroborative chain, especially when placed alongside physical evidence in forensics. The jury was instructed that they did not need to prove each detail individually, but had to determine whether the totality of evidence created a single reasonable conclusion. As the prosecutor connected each piece anonymous letters, drafts in the tin box, exchange data, shed floor evidence, light timeline, skeletal forensics, Witness statements. He emphasized that every thread converged on one person, Samuel Carter. No evidence suggested anyone else's involvement, and every anomaly tied directly to Sam's actions, location, and possessions. The defense attorney attempted to argue that the chain of evidence was merely circumstantial, but could not refute the unity between physical data, technical analysis, and behavior. As the trial entered its final day, the jury was asked to evaluate the reliability of each evidence group: skeletal forensics, typewriter analysis, exchange data, light timeline, shed excavated evidence, and witness statements. The poll showed no evidence was deemed unreliable, with the majority considered highly probative. Ultimately, the jury concluded that the coherence among physical facts, modern forensics, original 1955 data, and 1998 testimony formed an unbreakable logical chain. All led to the same truth: Evelyn Carter's death was not an accident, but a planned and concealed homicide, and Samuel Carter was responsible for that crime. The verdict was announced late in the afternoon on the sixth day, after 3 days of jury deliberation and a trial lasting nearly 3 weeks. When the judge read the sentence of life imprisonment without parole for Samuel Carter, closing a case that began in 1955 and found full resolution only after 43 years. In the courtroom, the atmosphere was both heavy and resolute. The chain of evidence presented by the prosecution, from skeletal forensics, typewriter analysis, exchange data, light timeline, surviving witness statements, to evidence excavated from Sam's shed floor, had created an irrefutable accusatory structure. In his remarks before sentencing, the judge emphasized that the Evelyn Carter case was a classic example of how modern forensic technology can illuminate the errors and gaps of past investigations, allowing truths once buried under layers of time to be unearthed with scientific precision. When the sentence was pronounced, Sam showed no strong reaction. He simply bowed his head, hands trembling slightly, his face drained of the resistance seen in the early days after arrest. The defense attorney stood beside him but could offer nothing beyond acknowledging the verdict, as the jury had unanimously agreed that every link in the evidence chain converged in one direction and left no reasonable possibility for innocence. The head of the cold case unit was present in court to witness the conclusion of the investigation they had pursued for nearly 2 years since the remains were discovered. As they left the courtroom, they only said that this was a victory for investigative persistence, for re-examining old files with fresh eyes, and for advances in criminal science. The Evelyn Carter file, held as a cold case from 1955 to 1998, was officially closed after Sam's conviction. A final investigative summary exceeding 400 pages was compiled for the Jefferson County Archive System, detailing the full course of the case, initial oversights, technical limitations of the 1950s, and the resolution process through late 1990s forensics. The report specially highlighted the pivotal role of re-excavating buried evidence and reconstructing the timeline via light analysis, 2 elements impossible at the original time but which became the keys to unlocking the case after 4 decades. In the conclusion section, the cold case unit listed key lessons: every piece of evidence, no matter how small, can become case-breaking if properly preserved. Inconsistencies in statements, even if initially downplayed, must be carefully documented, as they may serve as grounds for future reinvestigation, and especially the importance of applying new forensic technology to files once thought hopelessly stalled. The file also dedicated a section to the role of surviving witnesses after 43 years' fragmented memories that, when paired with modern forensics, helped reinforce investigative direction and pinpoint behavior on the morning Evelyn disappeared. Once the file was finalized, the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office sent a case summary to the Alabama Criminal Investigation Academy for use as a training exemplar in cold case investigator education. This marked the first time in county history that a case spanning over 4 decades was fully solved through the combination of old documentation, new forensic technology, investigative logic, and the persistence of the handling unit. The training document emphasized that the Evelyn Carter case was not resolved solely by a chance discovery, such as the heavy rain exposing the remains, but by maximizing every piece of information, including overlooked details, undervalued clues, or faint entries in the original file. The final section of the report described how the justice system closed the long journey with a fair verdict, reflecting consistency among physical evidence, modern forensics, supplementary testimony, and the entire investigative logic chain, leaving no reasonable gap for doubt. For Evelyn's family, the verdict could not restore the lost life, but at least it delivered the answer they had awaited for over half a century. For For the investigative community, the case became a symbol of how science and logical thinking can uncover truth, even when deliberately buried by time. And for the legal system, it served as proof that no case truly ends so long as truth remains in the shadows. Cold case file may lie dormant for decades, but when forensics, investigative analysis, and human determination converge, it can be awakened to restore truth to its rightful place. The story of the Evelyn Carter case, solved after 43 years, thanks to modern forensics, like data, typewriter examination, and the persistence of the cold case unit, offers many valuable lessons for contemporary American life, a society still grappling with domestic violence, harassment, stalking, and the prolonged silence of victims due to fear of being dismissed. First, the fact that Evelyn received threatening letters yet lacked sufficient investigative tools to protect her in 1955 reflects a reality that persists today. Many victims report threatening behavior but lack clear enough evidence, leading to the risk of being overlooked. The lesson here is, every threatening act, no matter how small, must be documented, preserved, and taken seriously. Because those very first, signs-like anonymous letters or silent calls in Evelyn's case are the seeds of organized violent behavior. Today, in the digital age, this is even more critical as threats can appear via email, social media, or anonymous messages. Additionally, the story highlights the importance of modern forensics and data preservation. The light, in 1955 scene photographs, seemingly useless, helped precisely determine when the truck was abandoned in the forest. The tin box buried under the shed floor for nearly half a century, containing threatening letter drafts and a lighter engraved SC, became decisive evidence. The lesson learned: information is never meaningless when properly preserved. Law enforcement agencies, hospitals, schools, and businesses across the United States need to understand that accurate record-keeping and data storage can save lives in the future. Finally, the story reminds communities of the responsibility to observe and report. The 1955 witnesses who heard impact sounds saw a stranger carrying a heavy object into the forest all once thought, "It probably doesn't matter." Yet 43 years later, those very details became crucial puzzle pieces. This reflects America's civic duty culture. When something unusual is observed, report it. Silence out of not wanting to bother can allow a case to remain buried for decades. Thank you for following the story solved after 43 years. If you'd like to continue joining us on journeys to uncover the truth like the Evelyn Carter case, don't forget to hit subscribe so you don't miss the next videos. See you in the next story, where we keep shining light on mysteries once thought lost to time.